Mr. Mayor, we are live.
Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the May 23, 2023 City Council Hybrid Mid-Year Planning Session. I'm Mayor Salim Neese. This afternoon's hybrid City Council meeting is being brought to you by Zoom. We're also broadcasting live on MITV Channel 21 and on the city's YouTube channel. Welcome to all and thanks for joining us this afternoon. Council members, please have your microphones turned on for the roll call. City Clerk Andrea Larson, please call the roll.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Andral.
Here.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Here.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Here.
Councilmember Weicker.
Here.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Here.
And Mayor Neese.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We have a quorum present. Next, we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Council, please mute and turn off your video to ensure that the U.S. flag is visible and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We now move to approval of this afternoon's agenda. If there's no questions, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Reynolds, which I picked up on his mouse, seconded by Councilmember Weicker. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Aye.
Councilmember Andral.
Aye.
Councilmember
Aye.
Reynolds.
I'm sorry, which one was that?
Councilmember Reynolds.
Oh, I apologize. Aye.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Aye.
Councilmember Weicker.
Aye.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Aye.
And Mayor Neese.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The motion passes and the agenda is approved. Next item of business is appearances. Do we have anybody sign up for appearances today?
There was no one who signed up to speak today, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, since there's no further appearances, the next item on the agenda is going to be the consent agenda, which I don't think is correct. First item of regular business is going to be AB 6256, the 2023-2024 work plan update, for which we'll welcome City Manager Jesse Baum.
Good afternoon, City Council. I presume everyone can see the slide deck there. So what I wanted to do this afternoon is just briefly look back on 21-22 work plan and then briefly review kind of the major items for 23 and 24. We do work plan check-ins with the council 2 or 3 times a year. So this is the first for the year. So let's dive in. And I've already mentioned those first 2 bullets. I will also, at the end of the presentation, identify some items that have come up that we did not include in the work plan, but we wanted to mention for your awareness. All right. Key themes from 21-22, just a reminder, as if I'm pretty sure none of us have forgotten that the early part of 21-22, we were still in the throes of the pandemic, but beginning to work on the recovery of city services. And certainly as we headed into 2022, we were really stepping up our recovery, including for the recreation division and the thrift shop, which were 2 divisions that were most heavily impacted by pandemic closures. We also had 2 years of catch up, which I have to say at the end of 2022, I was certainly feeling, and I know a number of you as well. We worked hard to pick up suspended work items such as the PROS plan, the climate action plan, and the ADA transition plan, just to name a few. Many, many other work items were also paused, and we got back to that in 2021-22. One of the challenges as we faced, especially in 2022, was a really tough job market. We also turned over a number of positions. That was difficult. I'm pleased to say that we are in a much better position and the number of vacancies we have is more consistent with what we would normally be experiencing. And I think really the bright spot on the last biennium, and certainly a theme that is carrying through this biennium, is the acceleration and investment in capital projects. You've heard many of us, including our mayor, reference the once in a generation opportunity to reinvest in the city's really critical infrastructure. And we were able to accelerate and fund projects for a number of reasons, including ARPA funding and the passage of the Parks Levy. So as I walk through the highlights, and I promise to move at a slightly quicker pace here, I am not naming everything that was done or started in 21-22, but I just wanted to pick off a few of the key items here. In the categories of working for a more efficient and smarter government, I wanted to mention we finally adopted a master fee schedule. This is super important. It makes your time, we make better use of your time. Certainly all of our city teams having all of our fees housed in one document. So it will now come to council through one touch. And that was a really important consolidation of work. This was an example of an item that was supposed to be done in 2020, but was impacted by the pandemic. We did some important work in 21-22 related to the financial management system replacement. We pushed out RFPs and laid the foundation for the work that is happening now to actually implement a new system. We had a new organizational structure. A lot of changes happened in 2020. Those were all implemented in the last biennium, and certainly a learning curve as we had new positions, new roles, but for the most part, it's gone really well. We also were working on other system improvements, and the one I called out here was a new payroll system, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Major planning work. It was planning fatigue in the last biennium for a good reason, but we had a lot of plans that had been paused in 2020, and we picked those back up. So I'm pleased to say we adopted the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. We approved a Recreation Reset Plan. We adopted the ADA Transition Plan. We completed major water system planning work. We also resumed work on the Climate Action Plan and adopted that just a couple of months ago. In the planning department, we added a senior policy analyst to work on land use policy and to set us up to have the resources we needed to do the periodic update to the comprehensive plan, which is work that is ongoing right now. We also worked with King County on regional growth planning and growth target development, and we ratified those growth targets in 2022. That's a pretty remarkable list. Some of the policies, although not all of the policies we worked on, you adopted a biennial budget in December. Major undertaking was to update your budget policies and financial management policies, and that was thanks to the support of a City Council ad hoc committee. Later on this afternoon, we'll actually be referencing these budget policies. So that was a major accomplishment. In YFS, we've been working on a whole suite of policies. I wanted to call out the policies and procedures related to HIPAA standards. We worked on those in 2022 and actually just are close to putting the finishing touches on that work. Kind of a major overhaul for recreation policies, including cost recovery, special events, and more. Other items that were suspended and we brought back, this is first bullet is sort of ironic since we're back virtual again for the moment, but the last biennium, we did bring the city council back to in-person meetings, and that required lots of work on the part of IT to get all of the technology in place so that we could hold successful hybrid meetings. It is that work that's actually supporting us now as we had to transition back to fully remote. We did a public opinion survey in 2022. We had not done one in 2020 due to the pandemic. And we brought back, in addition to all the recreation programs that came back, some of our emergency management programs and other programs like the CERT training and National Night Out also were recovered in the last biennium. Public safety, again, this is not the whole list of accomplishments, just a handful I wanted to call out. The police department achieved reaccreditation, which is something a significant body of work and something we are very, very proud of. Our emergency management teams, supported by police, fire, the city manager's office, and other teams, participated in kind of a number of touches, a regional debrief, if you will, on lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. That work will be used this biennium to inform the update to the comprehensive emergency management plan. Our fire marshal, he has been really doing a fantastic job on community engagement, particularly around fire safety lesson plans. So he developed the home safety exit drills, smoke detector education lessons plans, and more to come. And both police and fire, in addition to our mayor, have been out in the schools a lot in the last year in particular. I'm really happy to have the partnership that we have with the Mercer Island School District and really appreciate Superintendent Fred Runnell inviting us into the schools in a very meaningful way. We were even in the schools today doing a vaping presentation to the high school students, our community resource officer. Capital projects, I would probably be here for another hour if I went through the list of capital projects that we worked on in the last biennium. I just want to say, wow, thank you to the council for your leadership and investment in all of these just absolutely important assets and infrastructure. In addition to the work we've been doing on utilities, we have adopted annually a transportation improvement plan. We have a major project going on at Luther Burbank that will be under construction in the next year. And we'll be talking in the next presentation about the grant funding we've received for the dock replacement and the waterfront project. We have other things, big ones, water meter replacement, the SCADA project updates, and far more than I could possibly list. This is, while I'm skimming over the capital projects, I think it's important to pause here and note that this level of capital project work affects far more than just the Public Works Department. They are supported by the Finance Department, the IT Department, the City Manager's Office, and the Planning Department. So important to keep that context in mind as we think about other work items. This is a slide I added in this morning. Also important to note that in addition to our own capital projects, there is a considerable amount of regional work happening on the island and near the island. The King County Sewer Project is currently out on North Mercer Way. They've been slowly traveling east to west. We also have Sound Transit construction ongoing on the island. And then Wasatch, as was the case last weekend, has projects happening on I-90 and on either side of the island that also impact us. So I mention this because these projects require a considerable amount of staff time to ensure we're all coordinated and that we're also communicating and sharing important information about construction with the Mercer Island community, both the residents and the businesses. So I just wanted to remind you, this volume of regional work is, on another 2-year track. So we'll continue to see impacts and we'll continue to have staff resource needs to help coordinate these projects. A few other things I just didn't want to miss. The pandemic period was incredibly busy for permitting and we got backlogged, frankly. We worked really hard in the last biennium to shorten our permit review times and to clear out the backlog. It's still work in progress, but I'm incredibly proud of the planning department team for their work and really getting us to where we are today. Still work in progress, as I just said, but we really made some considerable improvements in the last 2 years. Something that we did at the direction of the City Council, and I thank you for that, is we updated our Code of Ethics and began providing ethics training for all of our public officials, including our boards and commissions. So we will have another training coming up after this next board and commission appointment process, and then another one after the council election. We also launched the Mobile Integrated Health Program, which involves both the YFS teams and our fire department. I will say, as I now turn to the look ahead, there were many things that we do or did in 21 and 22 that I did not mention, but that was intended to be the light touch. So council, I'm even going to do a shorter touch on the 23-24 work plan, but I wanted to call out some of the major items that we're working on. In the major planning work category, we are updating our comprehensive plan. That work will take us all the way out to the end of 2024. And we had established a scope of work last year But we know the legislative session will have some impacts on that scope of work. And so we're still in the process of, unpacking that and understanding the impacts. The town center parking study is underway. We paused it because a number of the bills that were under consideration were going to have an impact on the parking study. We will be coming to you in July with some early action items, and we're still evaluating the impact of House Bill 1110 on town center parking. But I would like to bring this work to a conclusion, hopefully no later than the fall. We have started on the comprehensive facilities assessment. This is a look at the repair or replace scenario for a number of the city's buildings, including City Hall and the Public Works building. Certainly timely, considering we've had some pretty significant issues at City Hall recently. We have 2 parks master plans scheduled to be started and completed this year, the Mercerdale Park Master Plan and the Clark and Groveland Joint Master Plan, so 2 waterfront projects. We are working on a playground replacement strategy. This is directly tied to the Parks Levy that just passed. We have funding basically to replace 1 or 2 playgrounds almost every year over the life of the levy. That requires some strategy and planning. And we will be working on the comprehensive emergency management plan update that will be due at the end of 2024. I know one of the council members, I think it was Councilmember Reynolds, asked me about the pandemic plan. That's kind of a sub-plan of the comprehensive emergency management plan. That will also be updated as part of this effort. Policy work. Slight overlap with the previous slide. Just to call out, we are still working to address and plan for the impacts of the 2023 legislative session. We'll cover that in a little more detail over the next 2 presentations. Don't forget that next year will be a budget year, so we'll be working on the 2025-26 biennial budget. And one of the work items, among many that will fall under that, is the development of a special revenue fund to track permit revenues, something that's been on our list for a while. The classification and compensation study is a project that is stopped and started far too many times. This relates to compensation and classification for your non-represented workforce. We are working with the consultant now to review the data and be prepared probably this fall, council, to come in front of you with a policy and implementation recommendation. We're also working on something that we call the cost allocation methodology, maybe a fancy term for cost recovery approach. We have a number of interlocal agreements, municipal court with Newcastle, Marine Patrol with several agencies east of us, and others. We have partnerships with the school district and WashDOT, and so we're doing a deep dive to ensure that in all of these relationships we are fully recovering our costs. And also, Marine Patrol is a good example. We want to make sure we're recovering costs for capital replacement of things like the Marine Patrol boats. So that work is on its way, and will probably be in front of the council either the end of this year or more likely 2024 with that information. Similar to the look back, the look forward on the list of capital projects is far too long for me to go over. So I'll just remind you, we have major work happening at Luther Burbank, very exciting. Certainly I already mentioned the water meter replacements and the SCADA project. We have a number of Parks Levy projects in addition to the playgrounds, work at Pioneer Park, for example. That's all happening now. The Tully site is, we have the consultant on board now to do the commuter parking there and consideration of use of that existing building. Council, I expect to be in front of you on that in September. The bike skills area is actually design is complete. We are very close to complete, I should say. We'll be under construction this summer with an opening this fall. There's a really, really long list of utility projects. I won't go over all of them today. But I will say, again, this is the most significant and robust capital program the city has ever undertaken. I'm certainly proud of all the work and the investment we're making. And we'll just remind you that this is a really one of the key themes for 23-24 is continue to staff these and deliver these capital projects. Just a handful of other things, and then I'll wrap up here. I'll remind you that one of the items in our work plan is a discussion and proposal on stabilization of the YFS revenues. And that includes collaborating with YFS Foundation. We haven't picked that up yet, but that will be a later this year effort. I've already mentioned the Parks Levy projects. A couple other things to call out. The Climate Action Plan, we'll be talking about that a little later today. We're proposing to work on implementation of some of the early action items. Same thing with the ADA transition plan. When that plan was adopted, it included a long list of projects. So we're working on a phased implementation of those. We have other things like collective bargaining. And then one of the biggest lifts, and I think one of the most exciting things we're doing this biennium is updating our new finance software, which will just really, really change how we operate and bring a whole suite of new tools to all of our teams, both internally and also will have many benefits for the community externally. So that's very exciting. We're still building back recreation in the thrift shop. I just wanted to say that. We're not all the way to the, where we were before the pandemic, but we're making great progress. The community center is even looking at implementing some new technology that will make accessing our services and reservations even more user-friendly. We also are working on HR software, payroll. That was the project that we started in the last biennium that will be finished. Lots of onboarding going. We've had a number of new employees join us. We have a few more positions to fill, so that is a priority for our HR teams. IT is working on some new cybersecurity software. This is an always happening kind of work item. We're always looking at cybersecurity and positioning ourselves in the best place possible to keep our technology safe. And then YFS is working on emergency assistance policies, including revisiting the budget, service levels, and programs. Before I get to the slide on what we left out, I want to just take a moment to pause and say, these work plan documents can be a little misleading because they don't call out the things that the city does every single day, the day-to-day work to support the Mercer Island community. So this is both the internal and external teams. And I just want to acknowledge all of those teams here and how important they are to delivering our services: maintenance, public safety, customer service, youth and family services, IT, GIS, human resources, recreation, our municipal court, our legal team. I left off the slide and I probably missed a few others, but thank you. I didn't acknowledge everything you do, but it's very important. All right, Council, this is actually my last slide. So occasionally, when we get to this point, we recognize that we left a few things off. Some of these were under our control, some were not. We'll be talking a little later about the impacts of the 2023 legislative session. A lot of bills passed that will add work to the planning department in particular. They will probably impact your comprehensive planning process and some other work, so heads up there. The work plan identified basically a solution for the leadership in our fire department because we are currently staffed by Eastside Fire and Rescue in the chief and fire chief role. I came to the council a couple months ago now and actually recommended we consider transitioning to a regional fire services model. I just wanted to mention that, the work plan basically considered a sliver of this, and with council's blessing, we are looking at a much bigger approach. So again, just slightly different than what's in your work plan. City Hall is closed, as everyone is well aware. That's why we're virtual this afternoon. We have an asbestos abatement project going on and a number of associated impacts that obviously were not foreseen. So that will have both an impact on your work plan, and also we will need some funds appropriated to keep that work going. Council, this one is probably the first time you're seeing this. I have directed our IT team and our recreation team to begin scoping a backup system. Here, I'm actually at the community center this afternoon. I've asked them to scope the implementation of another basically broadcast, a room that has broadcast capabilities on par with what we have at City Hall. We've just had too many building failures and occasional equipment failures. I think the redundancy is important. We also know that the Recreation Division would make use of that type of technology for private rental groups. So that is being scoped right now, and I anticipate coming to you. I'm not sure we're going to make it by July, but by September with a scope of work and an appropriation request. And finally, I mentioned earlier that we are at the end of 2024, along with our regional partners, we will be adopting a new comprehensive emergency management plan. But we realized, actually in preparing this presentation, that we left it out of the work plan. So that's just an acknowledgement that it's not on the list, but it's something that we are working on. All right, that was a lot of high level flyover. I'm happy to take any questions you have, or we can move on.
Sure. Looks like Councilmember Jacobson has a question.
Actually, I don't have a question, I have a comment. Thank you, City Manager, for giving us a sip out of a fire hose. And what your presentation illustrates is both the range and depth of the things that have happened under your leadership. And I want to underscore the word leadership because you have been a true leader of the staff and I think the City Council in directing our attention to the things that we needed to deal with from a statutory or policy standpoint. And I think it's remarkable. And one of the most remarkable things for me is that you have displayed both a short range look at things and a long range things, because many of the things that you just covered not only have immediate impacts, but have real impacts down the line for how we govern the city. It's a job very well done. And I and many of my constituents couldn't be happier with the job you've done. I want to thank you.
I appreciate that. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that I have a fantastic staff team. This is not a solo operation. So thank you.
Excellent. All right. Not seeing anybody else. I will say you did leave one bullet out, and that is whoever took the photos for your PowerPoint has been on point. I think you have the best Mercer Island photos in the history of PowerPoints. But I'll echo everything that Councilmember Jacobson said. It's just super gratifying to see the work that you and your team have done. It's nice to have played a small part in it. And spoiler alert to the council, I use this work plan update to kick off the process of the city manager's annual review. That's going to be coming to you at the June 6th meeting in the executive session to start that conversation. But keep all of this very fresh in your minds. It's a great encapsulation of all the work that's been done by the council, by the city manager over the last year and coming year. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, our next item of business is AB 6257, the recap of the 2023 state legislative session. And we didn't let her go, and she's back. Jessie Bond.
All right. Well, speaking of the fantastic support team I have senior management analyst Meryl Thomas-Schott joining us, and Robbie Cunningham-Adams as well. So I'm going to take the first few slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to them. And council, I have to tell you, this legislative session, boy, it was a lot. We're not going to go in detail through every bill, but we do want to give you that kind of high flyover of where the impacts are. So next slide, please. All right. For this agenda item, we're going to walk through the 2022-2023 legislative session, tie back to the legislative priorities. We'll spend a few slides because this is really where bulk of the work happened on housing bills and how that will impact our work plan over the next, really, it's going to be 2 to 3 years or more. And I've already said this, but we'll be talking about the impacts on the city's work plan. So the 2023 session, also known as a long session, kicked off in January and it concluded in April 23rd. On April 23rd, almost. The governor did call a special session to deal with the Blake fix because that legislation did not conclude during the regular session. I don't have the data, but I have to tell you, in my time in government, this had to be the most bills I've ever seen introduced. It was a lot for us to manage. Really busy legislative session. Next slide. City engagement, I think I've previewed this. Staff, lobbyists, and city council leadership among all the other city council members that participated. We really, as a team, put in a lot of time tracking bills, connecting with our representatives and other elected officials. Lots and lots of advocacy. It was probably at least half of my time through these few months. I know that Mayor Neese also put in, hundreds and hundreds of hours advocating for Mercer Island's priorities and the Mercer Island community. Next slide. A couple of things. I just want to remind you that annually we adopt our legislative priorities. That served as a foundation for our lobbying and advocacy work this year. We will be back this fall, probably the October-November timeframe with our legislative priorities for the next year. City Council, you authorized a contract for lobbyist services, which was very helpful this year. We have 2 state lobbyists and a federal lobbyist now. You also took action to approve a letter of opposition to House Bill 1110. That also served as a important piece of advocacy, and you all taking a position on that helped all of us working with the legislators. We came back to you somewhere around the mid-session regarding Senate Bill 5466, which was the transit-oriented development bill, and you also authorized talking points. We participated in the AWC Association of Washington Cities, Lobby Day in Olympia. Mayor Neese was there, Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum, and Council members Jacobson and Weicker. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I will say, again, just really, really high volume of touches this legislative session, mostly related to housing bills, but on some others. Lots of testimony. Mayor Neese was in front of multiple committees. Our lobbyists were also testifying and signing in either support, oppose, or neutral. Mayor Neese also really worked hard to connect with almost every single other mayor in King County and some nearby jurisdictions, just really to get people engaged and paying closer attention to the housing bills, like the missing middle housing bill 1110 and House Bill 1245, which is a lot splitting bill. We participated in weekly meetings with our lobbyists. That we as a collective it's council leadership, staff, and our lobbyists, and also attended the weekly meetings, legislative meetings with the Association of Washington Cities. There were some work groups formed, impromptu work groups to focus on housing bills, of which we also had staff and council representatives and our lobbyists participating. I share this slide just to illustrate how many hundreds and hundreds of hours went into the legislative session. I was really fortunate to be supported by lobbyists and also by the city council. I would not have been able to carry the load without that horsepower. So let's keep that in mind. The next legislative session will probably be very busy as well. Next slide, please. This is just a continuation to just describe the sheer volume of work. Okay, I am going to hand over the slide deck now to Meryl and Robbie. Meryl, go ahead.
Thanks. Good afternoon, City Council. We'll start off with some good news. The capital budget includes just over $3.5 million in funding for large capital projects at the Luther Burbank waterfront. The funds were received through the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program, Boating Facilities Program, and Aquatic Lands Enhancement account through the state's Recreation and Conservation Office, and also the Heritage Capital Grant Program. The projects funded at the waterfront include dock replacement and a new non-motorized small craft dock at the site, expanded ADA access to the docks, the shoreline, and the beach there, and phase 1 of the renovation and preservation of the boiler building to include a new roof, seismic retrofitting, and utility work. So this was a huge win for us and really exciting. Next slide. As you know, we closely tracked 2 main police bills throughout the session. Senate Bill 5352 will permit police officers to engage in a vehicular pursuit when there is reasonable suspicion to believe that a person in the vehicle has committed a violent crime, sex crime, escape crime, or is driving under the influence. This is a lowering of the threshold currently for pursuits and slightly expands the list of qualifying offenses for which an officer can pursue. Officers are still prohibited from engaging in pursuits for property crimes. Next slide. A special session at the end of the regular session addressed the Blake fix legislation. Senate Bill 5536 makes it a gross misdemeanor to knowingly possess a controlled substance or to use such a substance in public. Staff, including your police chief, will continue to provide information on the implementation of this bill. Next slide. The city supported Senate Bill 5303, which would have established the Public Works Assistance Revolving Account. The bill did not pass, but the Public Works Assistant Account was fully funded in the capital budget. Next slide. The city sought regional support for funding the replacement of 2 of its 3 Marine Patrol vessels. The funding was not included in the final operating budget, despite strong support from regional partners and a lot of good advocacy work by our team. Marine Patrol vessel replacement will remain part of the regular fleet replacement cycle, but will continue to look for opportunities for alternative funding. House Bill 1670 and Senate Bill 5770 proposed to revise the property tax cap for local governments to account for inflation and population growth. Unfortunately, these bills did not advance. And now I'll turn it over to Robbie and other colleagues to speak a bit on housing and land use legislation.
Thanks, Meryl. As I think, Council, you're familiar with, the housing and land use were significant themes of this year's legislative session. There's many bills we were tracking, and many of those bills that we were tracking did pass the legislature and have been signed by the governor. So one of the main themes of this presentation is this will result in significant impacts to the CPD work plan. So I'll review many of these different bills categorized in various ways. So first, we'll review a couple of the land use bills. You may be familiar with HB 1110. How this bill specifically will affect Mercer Island. It will require a 2-unit minimum density on all city residential lots. Additionally, it will require a 4-unit minimum density within a 1/4-mile walking distance of the future light rail station on the island. Additionally, HB 1337 also passed the legislature. This bill requires cities must both allow both an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, and a DADU, a detached accessory dwelling unit. And in addition, this bill prevents cities from requiring owner occupancy on any of the units on the lot. And there are some restrictions on the parking that may be required of these ADUs and DADUs. One thing the city spent a lot of time is clarifying how these 2 bills interact, and we did confirm that the unit per lot restrictions of HB 1110, again, that 2-unit per lot restriction, takes precedence over this bill. So even though 1337 legalizes both an ADU and a DADU, you can only build 2 units a lot. So you have the primary residence, and you can pick an ADU or a DADU, or you can build a duplex. The legislature also passed various permitting bills. SB 5290 has a kind of a carrot and a stick approach. It provides new grant funding for local governments to streamline permitting processes, but it also creates state mandated timing and review time requirements. And so if the city does not meet these review time requirements, there could be penalties to the city. Additionally, HB 1293, cities must apply only clear and objective design review standards to the exterior of new development. There are some exceptions, but this will have pretty significant impacts to our city design commission going forward. And Jeff Thomas, our CPD director, can speak more to that if you have questions. There's also a variety of other, I'll categorize as general housing regulation bills. SB 5412, for example, will exempt housing projects from State Environmental Policy Act review if they comply with a local comprehensive plan that has already been subject to SEPA review. So you can't create a SEPA, a complaint or review for an individual unit if it complies with the comp plan that a city adopts. Next is SB 5491. This will require the State Building Code Council to adopt standards to allow for up to 5 stories of multifamily housing to be served by a single exit, or in other words, a single staircase, no later than July 1st of 2026. And it'll make these standards available for local adoption, which I believe is a standard thing that many local cities do. So we'll have to keep an eye on that going forward in the future. SB 5058, this exempt buildings with 12 or fewer units that are no more than 2 stories from the definition of multi-unit residential building. Now, this definition is important because it triggers different standards and codes based on the size of the building. So this will require some adjustments on the city's part. And finally, HB 1042, this bill seeks to facilitate the addition of housing units within the envelope of an existing building zoned for commercial or mixed use. So it prohibits cities from imposing a number of restrictions such as density limits, parking mandates, permitting, and design standards that are beyond those generally applicable to all residential development within the existing building zone. I can't speak to how this may affect actual building projects on the island, but we do know this will require some reconciliation of our existing city code for the city to be in compliance. Now, while a lot of bills did pass in housing world, several did not that the city was tracking. You all may remember SB 5466, the TOD bill. There was the council, we provided our thoughts on how we would want to see this bill go. And for better or for worse, there was a variety of differing opinions on it, and the legislator could not come up with an outcome that would pass. Additionally, the lot splitting bill, HB 1245, did not pass. It died in the Senate, and the city did testify against this bill for a variety of reasons. And finally, HB 1628, this would have created a new local option for the real estate excise tax, in addition to an increase of the state REIT tax. And this funding could be used for affordable housing. The city did testify in support of this bill as an option for us to have revenue to support our affordable housing goals. Unfortunately, this bill did not pass this session. We do expect these 3 bills and perhaps others as likely to come back in the next legislative session. So you'll be hearing about these policy debates soon enough. Jesse, did you want to cut in?
Nope, go ahead, keep going.
Great. Finally, work plan impact. So that's quite a number of bills. It's a significant impact to the CBD team. There's going to be a lot of adjustments to various parts of that world, including the comprehensive plan, city code, and the permitting workflow. All these impacts and the staff and resources needed for this needs to be considered in the annual docket process for 2024 and 2025. And the implementation timelines for these bills are important to consider there. So SB 5290 and 5412, they have 90-day implementation deadlines. That means we need to be in compliance by this summer. So this will require interim regulations and in addition to work being added to the 2024 docket. The other bills mentioned have longer implementation deadlines. We need to be in compliance 6 months after the comprehensive plan periodic update. That is roughly June 30th, 2025. So staff will be bringing a 2024 docket request to implement these bills this fall. And next slide, I'll hand it over to Jesse.
All right, and I'll just mention. Oh. Okay, sorry, we had some feedback. I'll just mention our next agenda item will be actually talking about the docket, and so we can answer your questions about what docketing all of this work looks like. I wanted to mention, Council, we have been talking for at least as long as I've been the city manager about the residential development standards review. We had originally planned to come to this mid-year planning session and to scope that RDS review with you. Given all of the housing bills that passed, you can start to see there's a tremendous overlap in the code work we need to do and the RDS analysis. So we're recommending to pause the RDS review until we can fully get our arms around the work that's ahead of us and likely adopt the bills from the session. I know I've had a pleasure of talking to many of you saying, Jesse, how is this all going to work? I want to be honest, we are still sorting all of that out. The legislative session just ended a month ago. Much of what will be happening now, there's some rulemaking through entities like the Department of Commerce, where they will actually help us interpret some of the bill language before we get too much further in. So that is all happening now. I think Jeff Thomas, your planning director, and I talked. We'll be probably in front of you this fall, starting to lay out the scope of work and how we plan to approach all of this new work. Next slide, please. I mentioned during the previous presentation the town center parking study. We had paused that study specifically because of the TOD bill, Senate Bill 5466, which did not pass. We anticipate it probably will come back next session, we think. Not sure if there's enough votes to pass it, but we don't think it's totally dead. House Bill 1110, which is the middle housing bill that Robbie was just talking about, will have some impacts on town center parking regulations. So again, I'm working with the team, which is a cross-departmental team of both Public Works, Police, and the City Manager's Office on how we could conclude the town center parking study, identify early action items, and then maybe set aside some of those policy decisions that need to be part of this broader kind of housing and comprehensive planning work. So not a perfect outcome. It's been a struggle to finish the parking study, but we are mindful of working smarter and not producing a study that's immediately in conflict with new state legislation. So more to come. We'll be back in front of you in July with our analysis and some early action items. Next slide, please. All right. And Mayor Neese, as I hand this back over to you, I'll ask Rob Merrill, I'm not sure who has the deck, to stop screen sharing. I know several council members have said, when will there be an opportunity for us to debrief the legislative session? I think now would certainly be a good opportunity to start that conversation. And if additional debrief is warranted, we can set something for a future meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. I'll turn it over to Councilmember Reynolds.
A variety of questions, but I'll start with just one, which is for the comp plan, we had a housing work group that was working last year that was kind of paused during the legislative session. Is it going to resume now?
Yes.
Okay. I will look forward to that.
Anything else, Council?
I have one more question if no one else does. Let's see if the Deputy Mayor does, though.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just want to make a comment. The legislature was a tremendous amount of work this year, and I think going into it, there were a lot of early morning calls and weekend calls and late night calls, but I do want to give a special thanks to the mayor who put in an ungodly amount of hours waiting, just doing a ton of work to educate folks in the region and our legislators in the region and sort of a wide variety of people about how a lot of these housing changes were being considered and what the implications would be and what the impacts would be. And I think the staff did an excellent job supporting him in that effort. And I think it made a difference that I think is immeasurable, but also, made just a huge difference in the way that the bills move forward. Just to peel back the curtain a little bit, when you're testifying in the legislature, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. And Salim spent a lot of time waiting in his house or wherever it was to testify for a minute. And then, faced some unfriendly Twitter comments. But I think it was worth it to really provide a full picture of how some of the changes that are being contemplated would impact small communities like ours. And I think the tack that we took was very fact-based and really showed the challenges that some of the changes that they were thinking about making would make for infrastructure, amongst other things. And obviously, then just a few months later, we had a major infrastructure challenge. So these things are not theoretical; they're very real. And I think Salim and the staff did a phenomenal job of putting that front and center. So I just want to say thanks for that. And also on the grant front, the team did a phenomenal job positioning us to get, to be able to get those grants that are going to obviously transform Luther Burbank for generations. So really exciting. I just want to say thanks. It was a pleasure to play a very small role in supporting everyone in this effort, but it was really, I think, like many things our city does, a very small team producing a big amount of work. So I just want to say thanks.
No, I appreciate that. And I'll just add, it was a pleasure working with you. Your experience in DC and with legislative bodies much bigger than a city council was invaluable. I think everybody brought their own core competency to the process, and having the support of the city manager's office, and working with you and our legislative contingent, the results really speak for themselves. So I'm super pleased about that. And thanks to the council for getting out ahead of 1110. Adopting a letter that allowed me to speak to our mayor equivalents in all cities. Mayors are elected in all different ways, but once you are a mayor, you are the spokesperson for your city. And having that voice and having the support of the council was really critical, kind of getting out in front of these many bills that people were at different kind of capabilities of understanding and analyzing in terms of impact to their community and what that meant. So it really was, I felt very supported. So I appreciate that. 105-day session, you're 40 or 50 days into it and you're thinking this is going on for my whole life. Really is exhausting. So the support is deeply appreciated. Councilmember Reynolds.
Yeah, just start by echoing everything Dave said. I won't repeat it, but I agree absolutely with everything. So thanks to all of you that led that effort. I have a couple technical questions on the ADU and DADU thing. I just want to make sure I understand. Is it that you can have a DADU or an ADU, or can you have both? Because if you have both, it seems like that gets 3 units per lot. I'm trying to reconcile that to the 2-unit limit you were referring to earlier.
I'll take the first swing at that, and then Robbie can chime in if I don't get it correct. The ADU bill allows for both. However, as Robbie pointed out, I believe during his presentation, there's been some clarification, and I'm assuming that will come with some additional information as well at some point. But the 1110 bill would supersede the ADU bill, is our understanding at this point. So for the portion of the island that would be limited to the 2 units in the 1110 bill, then you would be limited to a primary residence and 1 ADU, or again, I think it was covered during the presentation, a duplex, 2 units.
Okay, so a duplex could not have an ADU associated with it in the non-quarter-mile zone.
Councilmember Reynolds, I'll just add the bill text of HB 1110 explicitly defines an ADU and a DADU, both counting as a unit. And so when you have the 2-unit max of 1110, that's why you couldn't do both a DADU and an ADU in that 2-unit zone, because that's 1, 2, 3 units with the primary residence and the ADU and the DADU each counting as a unit.
Okay, that makes sense. And then if I quick follow up, just generally, we had what I understood to be a pretty leading ADU regulation already, in that we're ahead of other communities in permitting these. Looking at the rules now, it seems like one big difference is the removal of the owner occupancy requirement. Are there other notable differences that we'll have to change in our ADU policy as a result of this?
There will be other changes necessary to comply with the recent legislation. You are correct, though. The most notable is the owner. The one that stands out for me, at least, is the ownership provision or lack thereof.
Okay. Thank you very much. Want to make sure I wasn't missing something else important.
Okay. Not seeing anything else. We're going to move to our next item of regular business, which is AB 6259. Thank you, everybody, for that presentation, Robbie and Merrill. Our next item is AB 6259, 2024 Comprehensive Plan and Development Code Docket Preview. And we will welcome CPD Director Jeff Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. I believe Ali is going to pull the presentation up here and drive the slide deck. Thank you, Ali. Okay, while we're getting set up here, there we go. We're going to cover a small number of things in this presentation here this afternoon. The first one, we're going to preview ultimately the 2024 docket, and I want to start by underscoring we're only looking at possible city-initiated items here today. So any speculation or information that's been whether that's been coming through City Hall or out there in the community at large about other potential proposals, none of that is going to be addressed here today. So we're only focusing on things originating essentially from the city staff to be possibly brought forward to the docket process. And prior to that, we're going to cover just a little bit of a quick refresher on the docket process for the council and for the folks watching here today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about tracking the progress here that's occurred over the last couple of years. We'll look at those city-initiated items, and then we'll round it out with city council feedback and discussion. Next slide, please. So we'll start with the refresher. The docket is the city's annual process for soliciting and compiling proposals to amend the comprehensive plan and development code each year. October 1st each year is the magic date. So proposals received essentially from October 2nd one year through to October 1st the next year are then put together and run through the docket process in that calendar year. In late October, generally speaking, the Planning Commission will do their work by doing a review of the docket proposals and making and forwarding recommendations to the City Council. The City Council then will follow up on that and consider the Planning Commission's recommendation and make final docket decisions, usually in early December, perhaps a little before that this year. Any items that are placed on the final docket by the City Council, what happens to them at that point is they're added to the Community Planning and Development Work Program for a full legislative review and consideration. Typically, we try and do those in the following calendar year. It always doesn't work out that way, but that's the goal. And I think it's really important to note before we move off of this slide, being placed onto the docket by the City Council is not a guarantee that the actual proposal, whether it's to amend the comprehensive plan or the development code or both, it's not a guarantee that ultimately the proposal is going to be approved by the City Council and adopted by ordinance. The docket decision is simply to move it forward to the next step in the process, which is the legislative review. And a legislative review obviously takes on its own life and ultimately has its own outcome. It may be approved, it may not be approved. It may be left dormant. So there's a lot that can happen once something makes the docket. Okay, next slide, please. So a little bit about tracking our docket progress here. Since 2020, we've compiled a table, and that was presented as Exhibit 2 in your agenda bill materials. That shows the outcome of every docket request that's been submitted, whether it was ultimately placed on a final docket or not in any given year. There's a little snippet there of Exhibit 1 on the screen for you that shows part of what was in your packet. Since 2020 and that docket process that occurred in the fall of that year, there's been a total of 15 requests that have actually made the final docket. And of those, 3 remain incomplete as we sit here today and talk. They're listed there. The B zone matter to allow school uses obviously is currently with the City Council. You just completed first reading on that at your last meeting. There is one prong left on the House Bill 1224, and that's the second bullet there at the bottom regarding transitional and permanent supportive housing. We have interim regs for that right now, and we do anticipate needing to renew those interim regs again this September as we wait to get the final information from Commerce in order. And then the last one was actually the only docket item that made the final docket last year for this year, and that's the Mercer Island Beach Club, the shoreline conditional use permits for marinas and swim facilities. And that is currently actively being worked on by the Planning Commission and should be coming to council hopefully at some point here in 2023. With that, I think we can move on. Thank you. So we're going to spend the bulk of the rest of the slide deck here taking a look at, again, possible city-initiated items for this year's docket. And there's 9 items in total. And again, those were presented in the agenda bill and also in summary in Exhibit 1 in your materials. We're going to tackle items 1 to 5 together as a batch. And they all relate to residential development standards, and they've all been previously proposed on the last 3 during the last 3 docket processes by an outside party, not city initiated. So what happened, as you may recall, at the end of the docket process last fall for 2023, City Council directed staff to take these 5 items and include them with the broader RDS analysis, which had at the time been anticipated on moving forward with a public format this year. And as Jesse and Robbie had previously covered in the prior presentation, with some of the impacts that we're anticipating from the most recent state legislative session on Title 19 of our code, we're looking at gluing some of that together here a little ways down the road. So the idea here is that rather than defer these items yet again, we would bring these forward as individual docket items this year for the 2024 work program. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through each of these here. These are outlined in, this is again a snippet from Exhibit 1, but you see the 5 items here with various sections of the residential development standards in Chapter 1902 of the code. Okay, let's move to item 6, please. Next slide. Item 6 is a new item, and it is originating from the city staff. And it does also, like items 1 through 5, pertain to the residential development standards in Chapter 1902. And this item specifically is in regards to the building height and how it's measured in residential zones. And specifically, how it's measured on downhill slope situations. So what we've experienced at the city and with our permitting staff dating back a number of years now is in subsection 2 of this particular section of code, the words downhill and facade have proven to be problematic in nature in the administration of the code. And we, just to be frank, we've seen just about every possible scenario that can be concocted from taking these words and construing them in different ways in plan sets that have come in. So the idea that we're working on here is that we need to, in this particular, I want to be super clear, this subsection of code has, it has taken up hours and hours and hours each time it comes up as part of a permit review. It takes up staff time, it takes up applicants' time. It's proven to be a real-time chore, and we just haven't been able to get to not necessarily anyone's fault of their own, but we've had a difficult time getting to administering these words in this particular subsection of code consistently. So the idea here is that by eliminating those words and focusing on building height from both the lowest and average elevations to the actual highest point on the roof, we can bring clarity and certainty to not only staff, but also to all of our customers that use this section of code. So if we can move to the next slide, I actually have a visual illustration here that will hopefully help you out. This is an actual This was taken from an actual plan set, from an actual permit at the city. It's been condensed down quite a bit to fit on a slide, so I don't expect you to be able to read any of the numbers or the words on this. But if we can focus on the two red boxes that have been highlighted here, I'll walk you through this. So the first red box, which is kind of centered there over one of the windows, kind of in the middle of the house, above the garage doors. So what's happening here is when this was presented to the city, we've got a lot where there's a house being proposed, and it's what I would refer to as typically as like a front split. So the slope of the lot is going essentially from the rear of the property towards the front of the property, which then creates, two floors that would be visible from the back of the house, and then 3 floors with the lower level here being the garages for the most part at the front of the house. This red box centered there kind of over again around that window area above the garages. What that is noting here in this plan set is it says cantilevered portion, and then in parentheses, furthest downhill wall extent. Okay. So that's the facade portion of the problematic words. What they've identified is that there's a bump out in this particular portion of the front of the house. And they're saying this is the furthest downhill part of the house, is this area in the red box. When we look at the code as it exists today, then the measurement as some think it's being described is to then take your lowest elevation and measure up essentially to the eave of the wall of the house. Well, with this facade and the downhill slope, the left-hand box in red there over on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see how they've actually measured from the lowest point, which is the bottom of the garage doors, to the top of that facade portion that they've noted that is further downhill than any other portion of this side of the house. And that measurement, those little numbers there on the left, it's 21 feet and change, basically. So they're saying, hey, our downhill slope facade is just over 21 feet, so we're complying with the 30-foot requirement of the code. Well, to any common neighbor or citizen walking by this particular house, they're not going to look at that and say, hey, look at that little facade. Boy, that complies with the height that's in the code. They're going to look at the entire house and say, gosh, I wonder if that entire wall, that entire side of the house, the front of the house actually complies with the code requirement. And that has been the struggle that what we've been working with customers to try and get them to comply with. So that's 30 feet. 30 feet from the lowest elevation, which is the bottom of the garage doors, up to essentially the eave that supports the top of the roof structure. That's the requirement that's in the code today. So we would like to modify that language to clean that up, to make that crystal clear to everyone, so that, again, we can bring a degree of efficiency and understanding to everyone involved in both drawing and creating these permits, and then the staff that are reviewing them. So that is item number 6. And I hope that picture was somewhat helpful to you. Item 7, moving on, is also a new item, and it would involve our town center development standards in Chapter 1911. What this item would propose would be to add government services, which is already defined in our code in 1916, add that as a use in the town center use table, and provide an allowance for structures being used for government services to build to the maximum allowable height in the specific town center zone in which it is located, as opposed to the current base height of 2 stories or 27 feet. So depending on which town center zone you're in, a government services building could be built potentially up to a maximum height of 39, 51, or 63 feet in height, if this proposal was to be docketed and ultimately reviewed and put into code. Okay, and then item 8, we're almost done here, Items 8 and 9, actually, I'm going to talk just momentarily about together. So items 8 and 9 are what were referenced in the previous presentation about needing to go through all those bills, figure out which ones are potentially going to have impacts on Title 19 of our code, our development regulations, and then put in motion code changes that will meet the respective implementation deadlines that Robbie had pointed out during the previous presentation. So item 8 is the short-term version of the two. So it would respond to Senate Bills 5290 and 5412. And you'll notice here, I've got HB 1293 on here with a strike through on it. HB 1293, when we assembled the agenda bill materials, squeaked through and was on the short-term proposal, when in fact its implementation deadline is actually part of the longer-term deadline, 6 months after the comp plan. So that's an error in your agenda bill materials. I apologize for that. And I wanted to highlight it here. So for anyone that picked up on, hey, your PowerPoint wasn't consistent with your agenda bill, that's the reason why. So again, 2 Senate bills here would be swept up with item 8 here. We will need to bring interim regulations and present those to the City Council in July to meet the 90-day implementation deadline. And then we would have a docket item this fall then that would run those interim regs through the regular legislative review process to be permanently adopted into the code next year. The one other thing, or 2 other things I'd like to point out here. At the bottom of this slide, you'll see options to consider, 8 and 8A. Item 8 is what was described in the agenda bill. So it would be the short-term solution for the legislative responses. And also it would propose to do a little bit of work in chapters 19, 15, 16, and 21 to do a little bit more synthesis with some inconsistencies and errors that need to be corrected in essentially the procedures for permits, how we process permits, issue notices, and so forth. That would be the proposal in item 8. If the council, for whatever reason, was so inclined in the fall to say, hey, you know, rather than combining a couple of different things together like that, let's just do the minimum necessary for the state legislative response. That's 8A that I've indicated here. That would only be necessary work to respond to Senate Bills 5290 and 5412. Okay, and then we'll move on to item 9, the final item. And again, this is the long-term play on the state legislative session. So this would be legislative session responses to House Bills 1042, 1110, 1293, because it's switched to this category from the other one, and then 1337. And as you can see there in bold on the first bullet, there's a whole truckload of chapters of Title 19 that would be impacted by these 4 bills combined based on our preliminary analysis. So there's going to be a lot of work involved in this. And then this is also the docket item where in the agenda bill we discussed pairing up the work from the RDS analysis because we're going to be going in and doing a lot of surgery on, in particular, Chapter 1902, but also a number of these other chapters as well that interact with 1902. So that's item 9. And then again, at the bottom, same as the last slide that you just looked at, in the event, you know, the council later this year said, you know, maybe we only need to, at this point, take on the necessary work to respond to these bills. That would be option 9A, would be paring it down a little bit. The final thing I'll note about this slide is that this work here for item 9, it's being proposed, or it would be potentially proposed on the docket here to set the work program for 2024. The actual work on this item, getting to a legislative review, won't be occurring until after the comp plan is complete. So that'll be in late 24 or early 2025 in time for that June 30th, 2025 deadline for implementation for those 4 House bills.
Can I pause real quick for some questions?
Yes, sure.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Yes, I forget the number, but number 6, is that the one that dealt with the height limits and the downslope?
Yes.
Okay, I'm spatial relations challenged, so bear with me. Your example was helpful, but a little too complex for my small brain. So let's say we have a building that is nothing but a box, like a cardboard box shape, no protrusions, no nothing. And it's on a slope. On the uphill side of the current rules, you could build something to 30 feet. Is that correct? And if you did, what would be the limit on the downhill side under the current rules?
So if we got building permits that were perfect flat boxes on each side, that would actually make our life really easy. And that would make the regulatory requirement for downhill slopes actually very clear. So that would be 30 feet from the lowest elevation to essentially the eave line that then would support the roof structure, is what the code says currently.
So if the uphill side of the house is 10 feet higher, the ground is 10 feet higher than the back, you'd only be 20 feet high at the front. Is that correct? Or on the uphill side?
It's a little more complex than that because the other 3 sides are measured using an average building elevation calculation. So that the concept that you're promoting is certainly working towards what the answer is, but the math is a little bit more complex than that.
Okay, so the rule change here is it going to change how a box like that will be handled, or is it only dealing with weird protrusion events?
Yeah, the one other change that it could potentially, again, we don't have an exact an exact proposal mapped out yet in exact words, but the average building elevation calculation actually goes to roof peak as opposed to that eave band that supports the roof structure above it. So it's the code. A simpler way of saying all that is the code currently mixes and matches a few different ideas together to how to measure structures in residential zones. And we're hoping to smooth that out a little bit to only really operate off of one background idea to deal with both problems together, as opposed to having a whole set for this and a whole set for that.
So you anticipated my follow-up question, which is I thought I'd recollected it was top of the roof that mattered. So it sounds like it's a mix. Just is it possible to answer the general question of would the proposed docket item, in cases where it kicked in, would it make buildings taller or shorter than they are now? Or is it even impossible to make a general statement like that? I recognize in some cases it probably have no impact, but
my vision for the concept would be that there would be minimal difference, but traveling the road from A to B to get to that decision will be much simpler and easier.
Okay, so it's intended to be a clarification as much as anything and not really dramatically change the height limits.
Correct.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, that's the only question I got.
Okay. We can flip back to the PowerPoint, but I think there's only one last slide, which was the slide that was going to prompt you, Mayor, to start feedback and discussion. So.
Okay, well, no need to jump in for just that. Council, is there any discussion on any of this, Councilmember Weicker?
Yeah, so thanks for all of that, Jeff. I just wanted to check in and see what your initial thoughts are on, the full meal deal versus the minimal requirements, 8 and 9 versus 8A and 9A. Like, I get there's a whole different volume of work, but those 2 items are significant in their own right. So just, could you talk to us a little bit about those 4 categories and those 2 sections for docket?
Yeah, sure. I think maybe to start my response, it's probably worth saying your CPD staff are definitely not. We're not flipping through the code, looking for extra work to pile on. There's a lot of work to do just with what's in front of us today. However, that said, these are all important things that we're dealing with here, and so part of what I see my challenge as CPD director here at the city is to thread that needle between, managing our resources as well as possible and trying to move forward the important work that needs to be done. So the RDS is very important work. It was a major work program initiative dating back to 2017, perhaps the major work program initiative that year that got completed. I don't know that for a fact, but it certainly could be. So that's important work, and I've talked with the city manager and certainly with the mayor and deputy mayor on occasion about this, and there's some economy of scale in pairings. The two pairings in items 8 and 9. There's some economy of scale there for us. The last thing we want to do is go through a complete RDS update, and the lengthy legislative review that would come with that and the time that's required to do that. And then a year later, engage in a major update to the residential development standards again, in response to this most current legislative session. So to the extent we're able to find some economy of scale there and pair things up and run a single process, I think we should try and seize those opportunities to do that, even though, in the short term, it looks like a lot more work for the city, but at least from my viewpoint, it's better than doing it twice. So.
Very good. Councilmember Jacobson.
To what extent, Jeff, is the work on the comprehensive plan and the work on the RDS and associated kinds of things complementary? In other words, and are there instances where you kill two birds with one stone? And if so, is that part of your thinking?
Yeah, it's, I probably should have, I'm going to indirectly answer your question first, council member, and then I'll try and provide you a direct answer. I may have been remiss to not mention this in the beginning when we were doing the docket refresher. We've committed to running this docket process every year. Not all cities and counties do that when they're in the middle of a major periodic update to their comprehensive plan. Some cities will suspend their docket process, which then, a lot of things end up getting swept up into your comprehensive plan update that maybe some should be and maybe some are better, evaluated independently from that major work initiative. I'm a big believer in having an opportunity every year, not only for the city, but for its citizens and property owners to have a process that they can formally engage in, which is the docket process. And, frankly, I think it also does a good job in helping us track our work and be accountable for the work that is entering the work program and then how it concludes. The docket process does guarantee a final outcome to that, as opposed to sweeping a whole bunch of things up into a really big major project and maybe losing some of those details in the process. So that's the indirect answer to your question. The direct answer to your question is the RDS work, the policies that are in the comp plan and the policy changes that have been discussed thus far with the Planning Commission as part of the periodic update, I see most, if not all, of the RDS work falling within those policy sideboards. So to answer your question directly, it's really the RDS is really technical code change work that falls within the policy boundaries that are set within the comprehensive plan and are likely to continue to be within those boundaries as part of the periodic update. So hopefully all that made sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. So not seeing any other comments, I want to take a little bit of just a moment to talk about a docket request that we know is coming, but isn't in this preview, which is the request that the Mercer Country Club is considering for a bubble over some tennis courts on a conditional use permit property on the south end. I've had a number of discussions, looked at the code, looked at how that particular problem might align with other problems that we've seen at the city throughout the pandemic, and maybe even beyond the pandemic. It turns out that we don't have any robust program in Title 19 for temporary use provisions, and that a temporary use provision might be the type of vehicle that would best accommodate or request something like what the Mercer Country Club has proposed. Can you, Director Thomas, add any kind of color to Title 19 and your background with other cities and what they've had in their code that we don't have in ours that might be a vehicle for solving something like the bubble over the tennis court issue?
Yeah, most other municipal codes, which would include cities and counties in Washington, do have provisions in their code that address temporary uses in their land use code. So what you'll typically see are, provisions in code that will address the types of temporary uses that are approvable by any particular jurisdiction. You'll also see any special provisions that may or may not apply to one or more temporary uses. So there may be special development standards, there may be special time limits. In general, temporary use codes will generally allow a use for up to 180 days, which is the equivalent of 6 months, roughly. And so that's fairly commonplace in what you see in municipal and development codes in Washington.
Okay. Do you have a sense of how big of a lift it is in terms of work planning to build into our code some accommodations around temporary uses in Title 19?
Moderate, relatively speaking, to other work that we're both taking on right now, as well as looking at doing. There would definitely be research and code writing required, new code writing required, and then obviously the public process that would come with that effort to move through a formal legislative review.
Do you have a sense of the number of problems it might solve? If we look discreetly at the bubble over the tennis court and a cup as it being one problem that it might be able to address, just how many other kind of instances you maybe think of that it could be helpful to?
Yeah, what we common questions that come up, we get questions more often than not regarding other types of covered structures, temporary tent structures, both in a residential type sense as well as a commercial type application. We get temporary signage questions that come up as well. And we also get questions regarding, uses for short-term type, one-day event type uses to, longer term, but still temporary type uses as well. So I think temporary use provisions can cover a number of different things in a number of different contexts. And they typically do what you see with adopted codes in other places.
Okay, and before I make a motion, just in terms of legislative risk, we have all these frameworks, the Growth Management Act and different sideboards on what we can and cannot do in terms of development codes. Is this an area of code that you would feel has a lot or a little legislative risk trying to advance forward as a solution for something like that?
Legislative risk or legal risk?
Or legal risk, sorry, in terms of, not being a spot zone or being something that just immediately created a barrier to completing it.
So in full disclosure, and all of you know this already, I'm not a lawyer, but again, just speaking very generally, temporary use codes that are adopted by many other type jurisdictions are, from my perspective, are founded in the same way as, other provisions of zoning code where we need to be, broad and fair and equitable across the board. So that would be the foundation on which I would approach if I was directed to start working on temporary use provisions for Title 19. And we would go at it that way. And obviously work with our legal counsel in the process.
I appreciate that. So with that, I'm going to make a motion to direct the city manager to prepare a docket request to establish temporary use provisions in Title 19.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Neese, seconded by Councilmember Jacobson. I think you can already get a sense of where I've been going with this. There's obviously an issue that the country club would like to address. I've heard of at least two or more other issues that would be solved by a code docket item like this. Doing it at this juncture gives us enough time, hopefully, to fully develop a docket item that the council could consider in the fall. So I appreciate the support on that item. Go to Councilmember Jacobson, you had your hand up first.
Yes, Director Thomas, if I recall correctly, Bellevue and some other places use that kind of a mechanism to permit sidewalk dining and certain other reactions to COVID to help out their businesses. Is that recollection correct?
Generally speaking, I would agree with that.
Mr. Mayor, I was just offline for a moment, but to Councilmember Jacobson's point, and if this was covered previously, I apologize. During the pandemic, you may recall we had challenges supporting businesses and other operations like preschools when they were seeking to install tents and things like that. So this temporary use provision, or what would eventually be a temporary use permit, would give the city the tools to accommodate requests like that. There are also things like special events, which could be city-driven or another entity that could be permitted using this type of a tool. So for what it's worth, the absence of this type of permit process has certainly challenged us. And I think it will be a time well spent.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have another question, but I'll wait in line.
If it's related, I'm happy to take it before we move on.
Yeah, it's more of a comment, and it has to do with this. And it seems to me that we are a government of laws. However, that there's a lot of cumbersomeness that comes as a result of that. And I think this happens to be an instance in why I seconded the motion in favor of it, that I think it allows us to react with a little more nimbleness to situations and without overkilling them. So that's what the base of my support is.
Thank you, Councilmember Jacobson. Councilmember Reynolds.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for putting this one forward. I'm certainly supportive of the objective here, and this seems like a reasonable solution to address the immediate problem. I'm still a little uncomfortable with the fact that we seem to, with this proposal, with the comparable beach club proposal, not comparable, but the beach club proposal we had related to the shoreline conditional use permit and other options on the island, it feels like we're taking a series of band-aids to what might require a broader solution. And I just want to confirm my understanding of timing and process, that if another person or entity were to come forward between now and October with a broader solution that addressed other problems, like, for example, allowing non-residential uses to seek variances, that's still something that could be considered in time for the docket if it was submitted by October. Is that correct?
That is correct. October 1st is the deadline for submittal of docket requests.
And the fact that we're doing it now rather than through that resident initiated process doesn't make it happen any faster than in the priority list than other submissions that came through. Is that correct?
Yes. So the items that have been previewed here today as potential docket requests, plus the item that the mayor just made a motion for, excuse me, those items from today moving forward won't daylight until October then, when they become part of the compiling of docket requests along with any outside requests that are received. And then they will go through that review process with the commission and the council in the fall.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Councilmember Weicker.
Okay, so I just want to be clear that we're doing this temporary use for all of the applicants that might come through. This is sort of solving a problem on a bigger scale. It's not solving a specific one that maybe the entity, the community center, the country club should have brought forth itself. I want to be clear that this docket is a broad category, not a specific one to that organization, because I'd like to have specific organizations present their own docket items.
That's my intent. This is a code change that benefits anybody seeking the relief of that Title 19 code.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Certainly. Okay, any other discussion, council? Not seeing any. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mayor Neese,
Aye.
Councilmember Andrell,
Aye.
Councilmember Weicker,
Aye.
Councilmember Jacobson,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum,
Aye.
Councilmember Weinberg,
Aye.
and Councilmember Reynolds.
Aye.
Was that nay, Councilmember Reynolds?
No, that was aye. I apologize. Thumbs up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Motion passes. Okay, council, is there any other items that anybody would like to contemplate in the pre-talk discussion? All right. Not seeing any. We'll move to our next item. Does anybody want to break before we get into the next item of business? Yeah.
Can I just seek some clarification, or are we kind of, are we voting on the other items?
No, there.
1 through 9?
It was just daylighting it. The reason we voted on that last one was to provide direction to the city manager to prepare the docket item.
Okay, so kind of the default is that these other 9 items or what have you will be put forward in the fall. Is that correct?
My understanding is they are all headed to the docket.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so is a 10-minute break sufficient for everybody? Okay, so council will be in recess starting at 2:39 for 10 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, we are back live again.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for rejoining the May 2023 Mercer Island City Council mid-year planning session. The council has just completed a discussion on AB 6259, the 2024 Comprehensive Plan Development Amendment Docket Preview. Our next item of regular business, which we are at now, is the AB 6255, disposition of fiscal year 2022 year-end surplus and direction on deferred 2022 budget proposals, for which we will welcome Finance Director Matt Morton.
Thank you, Mayor Neese. Good afternoon, City Council, City Manager Bond. I am Matt Mornick, your Finance Director. I'm going to take just a second here to confirm you can see our opening slide for item 6255.
Sure can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This afternoon, we're going to go through 17 slides to provide background regarding the topic of the afternoon, the 2022 year-end surplus, before walking through guidance outlined in the city's financial management policies about how to put surplus dollars to use. We'll take the remainder of the discussion in two parts. First, we'll walk the council through the city's fund balances and reserves that are not reaching the 2023 target funding levels as established in the city's financial management policies. And we're going to provide recommendations that work towards reaching those targets using the 2022 year-end surplus. This portion of the discussion today was not included in the agenda bill, and that was largely because the staff team has been working through the details up through today. So for that, I apologize. This is not meant to surprise the City Council. The staff team is just abiding closely to your financial management policies and wants to ensure that our recommendation is in line with established best practice and is thoughtful given the emerging challenges and economic uncertainties at this point in time. Once the council deliberates and decides on fund balances and reserves, we'll move on to the second portion of the discussion regarding the disposition of budget proposals and early action items associated with the climate action plan. The staff team is available throughout the presentation and discussion to answer your questions. Okay, so at the end of 2022, the city's year-end surplus included unassigned ARPA dollars, unassigned general fund balance, and the contingency fund that was above the established target funding level. These resources make up the 2022 year-end surpluses and can be used on general government services. So starting at the top of this table, of the city's $7.2 million that were received in fiscal recovery funds that are from the American Rescue Plan Act, just over about 1.9 million remains unassigned at the end of last year. These resources must be encumbered by the end of fiscal year 2024 and spent by the end of 2026. The unassigned fund balance in the city's general fund is slightly greater than 1.5 million at the end of last year. And this was due to a combination of expenditure savings and revenues coming in higher than expected for the year. Finally, the contingency fund is the city's emergency fund. It includes resources to address an unexpected revenue shortfall or a significant increase in the cost to deliver public services. The target balance in the contingency fund is set at 12.5% of the general fund budgeted expenditures. And so based on adopted policy, the contingency fund is about $218,000 above the target funding level. Speaking of policy, in September 2021, the City Council will remember adopting a new set of policies that collectively aim the city's financial resources towards meeting the city's long-term goals. These policies are an excellent read, but the section that's specifically relevant to us this afternoon is section 6, which presents guidance on the replenishing the city's fund balances and reserves, along with ways to use one-time year-end savings in a strategic manner. Section 6.2 lays out in detail suggestions for the council for using year-end savings. This slide summarizes the 7 main strategies in order of priority as laid out in the policy. That begins with ensuring the operating balances and reserves are at their target funding levels. Also reducing long-term liabilities, committing resources to one-time investments, and so on. As mentioned earlier, for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to focus on replenishing operating balances and reserves and making one-time investments as outlined among the list of budget proposals and climate action plan early action items. The first portion of our discussion deals with just replenishing the city's fund balances and reserves that are not at the 2023 target funding levels. So by way of background, adequate fund balance and reserves are just a core element of the city's fiscal strategy. With council's direction, the city created and maintains 31 different reserves and fund balances, which provide the city with options to proactively manage our cash flow based on very specific needs and respond to unexpected issues or buffer our services and operations against different forms of risk. At the end of 2022, only 3 fund balances and reserves were not at their target funding levels. So the first is the compensated absences reserve, which represents the value of employee earned benefits that can be converted to cash. The compensated absences liability is measured using salary rates, and with the rise of employee compensation costs in the current biennium, the reserve is underfunded by about $47,000 if it is to reach the 50% of the total liability target funding level. The operating fund balance for the Youth and Family Services Fund was established with the adoption of the financial management policies in 2021. And by design, the fund balance is meant to address temporary revenue losses and ensure that fund has adequate reserves given the asynchronous nature between the city's biennial budget schedule and the school district's academic year. The target funding level for that operating fund balance is 6 months of the average monthly expenditures for YFS. With about $386,000 at the end of 2022, the current operating fund balance is underfunded by about $864,000. The target for 2023 is $1.25 million. Finally, the self-insurance claim reserve pays for insurance claims not covered by the city's property insurance. As a reminder, in 2021, the council established a $60,000 target funding level. The reserve was drawn down to cover the deductible associated with repairing art that was damaged. And so a total of about $5,250 is required to bring the reserve up to the target funding level. And so what we're recommending this afternoon is that the city council consider shoring up the YFS fund balance and the other 2 reserves using a portion of the 2022 year-end surplus. This recommendation includes using all of the contingency fund unassigned surplus and a portion of the general fund unassigned surplus as laid out in this table. Excuse me. Just note that our recommendation only includes $300,000 of funding to be committed to the YFS fund operating balance at this time. And our thinking here is that it's just prudent not to use up all of the city's surplus dollars at this point in time, and rather just commit to making incremental contributions as we're equipped to do so each biennium to reach the target funding level for the YFS fund balance. With essentially 2 more contributions of a similar amount to what we're recommending today, we anticipate that we're going to be able to fully fund the YFS fund operating fund balance in the 2025-2026 biennium. That's the hope. So should the council desire to fund the YFS fund balance and the 2 reserves to their target funding level, the motion as presented on this slide is for the city council's consideration. If the council prefers to take action at a later date, the staff team can revisit this topic during the mid-biennial budget process. So I'm just going to pause here for discussion and any questions.
Okay, Councilor Jacobson, you had your hand up. Is it got your question answered there? You're on mute, Jake.
Right. I think more or less, I'm digesting what our finance director just said. So if it doesn't marinate, I'll raise my hand again.
Very good. Councilmember Reynolds.
Yes, Mr. Mornick, can you just comment on the YFS fund and in particular, remind me at the beginning of the year or last year, where were we relative to the target? And is the 800,000 target because something unexpected happened this year, and if so, what? Or is it just that we started out way under target?
So the council may recall when we adopted our financial management policies and established the 6-month reserve for the YFS operating fund. By design, what we were doing was just trying to create that 6-month buffer. And it was always going to be a large number, somewhere between $1 to $1.5 million. The council dissolved the YFS endowment fund, which at the time was just designed to collect interest on an initial pot of money that was set aside, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was a total of $289,000. We dissolved that fund and we committed that to the operating fund balance of the YFS fund. So that was our initial seed money when this operating fund balance and the target associated with it was established. As of right now, at the end of 2022, to be more precise, the current balance for the operating fund balance is $386,000. So we're well positioned, given that we are fortunate to have some surplus at this point, to commit some of that surplus to the YFS fund operating balance. But I hesitate, and the staff team hesitates to try to commit to meeting that goal in one fell swoop.
Okay, Councilmember Whiteman.
Thank you.
So this is a comment, not a question. I just want to thank Matt for bringing this forward because it fits with the policies we put in place a year and a half ago about setting aside all these fund reserves and having some target balances. So I am in full support of the staff recommendation because it meets the plan and policy we put together a year and a half ago. So thank you. I think this is a great idea.
Okay, Councilmember Weinberg.
So as I see it, we have 3 options. There's one before us, which is to get the compensated absences reserve back to its intended balance and get the self-insurance claim reserve back to its intended balance and give $300K to the YFS fund to get it closer to its balance, but not all the way to the balance. So I think that's the option we're considering on the table. There's an option of going all the way, of getting the YFS fund all the way to its intended balance. There's the opposite option of doing none of these and leaving all 1.5 million in the general fund balance. And the only reason I could see for considering such an extreme measure would be looking to the future when we still have 1% cap on our property tax, and we've got inflation averaging around 5%, a $40 million expense level for the general fund rounding is going to be going up about 1.8 million or 1.6 million if the inflation holds. And I'm not sure, or well, 2 million if it's 5%. I'm not sure if the balance that we have in there is going to be enough to hold. Of course, our revenues go up as well. Sales goes up with inflation, sales tax says. So I guess I'm trying to get a feel for what is the risk of taking the action that is proposed here, because we will have slightly less in our general fund. So what's the risk of us hitting that crossover point sooner as inflation continues to outpace the growth of revenues? Is that something that Matt, you might have some insight into or some forecast on.
Well, thank you, council member. I would say that this is a measured risk at this point in time. We, as I responded to some of the questions that came in prior to the meeting today in the Q&A matrix that was sent out last night, the financial forecast is done every September, and we really rely on essentially the first 6 months of data of the year, as well as the prior 2 fiscal years, to project out the trends that we're seeing with both our revenues and expenditures and where we anticipate our budget going for all of our funds. Although we have 20 funds, we focus the forecast on 6 funds. And so the 2 operating deficits that you cited, one in the general fund and one in the YFS fund, is something that we're paying really close attention to. With that being said, we feel that it is a prudent first step to abide by our financial management policies, given what we know right now, with an eye towards paying very close attention to what's going on in the economy and letting the data that we have from January through June of this year inform a financial forecast that the City Council will receive in the fall. And so at this time, I really can't speak to any additional risk where things are headed, just knowing that we're going to make that assessment later this summer and present that information for council's consideration. So it is at the council's discretion to pause on this recommendation if you would prefer to not move these resources around and keep them in the general fund and in the contingency fund. That is absolutely within reason. We're just seeking your deliberation and decision on this.
May I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Mayor?
Certainly.
Yeah. So is the primary reason why we didn't, or why staff is not suggesting bringing the YFS fund fully up to its target level because it wants to hedge its bets against having that crossover point happen sooner?
I would submit that it is never wise to spend all your money all at once.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Arnold.
Yes, I'd like to move to adopt the staff recommendation as shown on slide 8.
Second.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Reynolds, seconded by Councilmember, was that Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum?
No, it's Ted.
Councilmember Weinberg. Okay, and the motion, if I can just read it into the record, is to direct the city manager to assign $47,255 from the general fund surplus to compensated absences reserve, $81,275 from the general fund surplus, and $217,725 from contingency fund surplus to the YFS fund operating fund balance, and $5,250 from the general fund surplus, the self-insurance claim reserve. Is that correct, Councilmember Reynolds?
That is correct.
Okay, and those will come forward at a future council meeting and budget amending ordinances. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. Your hand's still up, Councilmember Reynolds. Nothing further?
Just in case we need a discussion, but I don't think we do.
Okay. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. Matt, could you stop screen sharing first?
Absolutely.
Councilmember Androl?
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum? Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum? I think that's an aye, but I can't hear you. Yeah, I still can't hear you. There's something going on with your audio, but I saw you say aye. Councilmember Weicker?
Aye.
Councilmember Weinberg?
Aye.
Mayor Neese?
Aye.
Councilmember Reynolds?
Aye.
And Councilmember Jacobson?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, the motion passes. And that gets us to the next section.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. We're going to proceed with the second portion of our discussion regarding deferred budget proposals and the early action items from the climate action plan. As the council recalls, the original list of budget proposals was a result of the city council planning session over a year ago, in which the proposals were drafted for consideration for the 2023-2024 biennial budget process. Staff and the city manager also evaluated additional proposals and advanced several for the city council to consider during the budget workshops this past fall. The council approved 6 budget proposals that were tied to the capital fund, the street fund, and the utility funds, and deferred consideration of the general fund and youth and family services fund budget proposals for discussion today. The updated list of 17 budget proposals are outlined in detail in Exhibit 1 and include estimated costs for each fiscal year, the potential funding source, the department overseeing the work, and the city manager's recommendation. I encourage council to refer to Exhibit 1 during the discussion this afternoon. So of the 17 budget proposals, the city manager and staff team recommend 9 as outlined on this slide. So for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to go through each one, but overall, these 9 proposals, as indicated in Exhibit 1, are qualified uses of ARPA funds. And so if the council approves these proposals, the resulting financial impact during the 23-24 biennium amounts to almost $840,000. 3 of the budget proposals have no recommendation from the city manager or the staff team. And for these 3 items, 2.7, 2.12, and 2.17, the staff team seeks the city council's direction. These items are qualified uses of ARPA funds, and if approved, the financial impact during the 23-24 biennium is at minimum going to be $136,000. So just regarding item 2.7, as of right now, the staff team doesn't anticipate costs associated with this proposal, but that may change as we begin this body of work if it is approved. And so the initial recommendation is to use staff in the city manager's office to engage with our federal lobbyists on this item to further explore the idea, and there may be future resource needs. Okay, as a reminder, City Council, the Climate Action Plan was heroically adopted this April of 2023, this past April. And the budget proposals were drafted before the Climate Action Plan, I'll refer to as the CAPS adoption. So the staff team went back and pulled together early action items based on available financial and staffing resources. So I want to remind the council that the staff's team's focus on the CAP work is multi-pronged, meaning that the early action items amount to the city's initiated efforts that contribute to greenhouse gas reductions, but they're a portion of a much larger collaborative effort underway with the city, state, county, and federal partners. And so Exhibit 2 was pulled together to begin implementation of the CAP to align with our existing resources and the current work plan goals. So please note among the 6 early action items listed on this slide is budget proposal 2.4. As we explained in our responses last night to questions received from council on this item, there was essentially a mistake. We missed this item. It should have been included in the early action items. And so we're proposing, the city manager supports this item and the staff team is recommending it for funding. These 6 items are qualified uses of ARPA funds. And so if approved, the financial impact during the 23-24 biennium amounts to just over $220,000. Okay, before we get to staff's recommendation and to discussion, it's just important to note that the budget proposals and the early action items for the CAP do not include the unbudgeted biennial impacts that we anticipate are going to have a significant impact on the city's finances. The city has a number of building facilities that require substantial long-term investments. And we make these decisions around these investments based on a facilities long-term planning strategy, of which we are only in the first phase of this work and this work is currently underway right now. So the staff teams anticipates additional resources are going to be required to develop a comprehensive understanding of the condition of the city's facilities, which is going to inform decisions about the future of the civic campus. Excuse me. The closure of City Hall further kind of underscores the importance of a facilities long-term planning strategy and points to just a suite of expenses that were not anticipated and therefore not budgeted in the current biennium. So, for example, work associated with relocating the municipal court, finding a new base of operations for the police department, potentially leasing new workspace for the majority of the staff team that is now forced to work remotely, most of which are working remotely. Along with remediating City Hall and carry all these things carry costs that at this moment we just remain unknown. As the council heard earlier this afternoon, we're adding a significant body of work to the CPD work plan as a result of the state's legislative update. So we're still evaluating whether additional resources are going to be needed, but there is a good chance of that. Work on the classification and compensation study, as Jessie mentioned in her presentation earlier, has suffered a few starts and stops along the way, but we anticipate that responding to the study's findings is going to have costs associated with it. There are many unbudgeted impacts on the horizon that the staff team has our eye on, but just as a reminder, Council, we recently solicited proposals to transition to a regional fire service model. Should the council decide to pursue that transition, we will likely need resources to support one-time transition costs. The recommendation before council is to discuss the budget proposals and the CAP early action items and provide the staff team direction on recommended budget appropriations. As a reminder, all items that the council approves today will return at a later date within a budget amending ordinance. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for council discussion. The staff team is here to answer any questions.
Very good. All right, Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. Well, I circulated a motion this morning to kind of get our discussion going here. So if that was the right time, I think I'd like to make that motion.
Very well.
All right. I encourage everyone to take out your packets. Make sure your pencils are sharp here. I will go against my nature and try to read very slowly. I move to approve budget proposals 2.1, develop a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. 2.2, policy to ban the use of personal fireworks. 2.3, development of a parkland acquisition strategy and land donation program. 2.4, expanding curbside doorstep recycling options. 2.13, continuation of the 1.0 LTE management analyst. 2.15, new 1.0 LTE assistant planner position. 2.18, new 1.0 LTE support services foreman. 2.19, initial funding for City Hall asbestos testing and abatement. 3.1, YFS program evaluation. 3.2, YFS community needs assessment. And then additionally, from Exhibit 2, CD 1.2, NS 2.5, CC 3.1, TR 1.6, NE 1.7.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Moved by Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum, seconded by Councilmember Reynolds. City Clerk, did you capture that motion?
I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Any discussion? Do you want to speak to the motion, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, so I'll say, this list encompasses everything that was recommended by the staff. I thought this would be a sort of a good point to start off, and if there's things that folks want to take off or add on, at least we can kind of work through kind of a good baseline here. So I support the recommendations made by the staff. There's a couple others I'd like to talk about, but I figured we could start here.
Okay, and as a seconder of the motion, Councilor Reynolds, do you have anything to comment on?
I'd just like to seek clarification on one thing of the intent here. If we pass this as it stands, will we then circle back to talk about and have an opportunity to approve other items, or would those be more properly expressed as amendments to this one before we vote on this one?
Yeah, we're going to amend off of this and see how that goes.
So when the eventual motion is passed, we're done.
That is the goal.
Okay, already, thank you.
Okay.
No, I think the Deputy Mayor's proposal for how to approach this is wise. I am going to have a few questions that might lead to amendments, but I'll circle back and let other people talk first.
Okay, Councilmember Weicker.
Okay, totally agree with the motion. However, I'd like to offer a friendly amendment to 2.4 regarding the expanded recycling. And I'd like to not call out which contractor we'll use, because my understanding is that Recology may offer this expanded recycling program. It's not everything that goes in the blue bin, but they do have some possibility of doing this door-to-door or event planning for the hard to recycle items. So I'd appreciate staff keeping this neutral and then go find the best deal.
So the motion itself is simply read 2.4, expand curbside doorstep recycling options. I think the city manager could probably speak to if that requires an amendment or not.
I will. I'm not in a position to accept a friendly amendment, but I will agree with you, Councilmember Weicker. I think in the description we specifically called out a prior relationship with Ridwell, but as the staff work to implement this program, we would certainly be open to other opportunities, other vendors. Thank you for calling that to my attention.
Okay, thank you.
So no amendment necessary on that one. Anything else, Councilmember Weicker?
Nope, that'll do it.
Okay, and we go to Councilmember Jacobson.
Yes, I move to amend the motion by deleting item 2.2.
2.2. Okay, so moved by Councilmember Jacobson, seconded by Councilmember Anderl. The motion is to remove 2.2 from the budgeted items, which is the policy to ban the use of personal fireworks. Any discussion? Councilmember Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Yeah, I think this is something that's worth looking into. We're one of the few cities in the region where personal fireworks can be used. I tried to find the email in my inbox, but I was not able to. But my recollection is that our number of calls on the 4th of July is exponentially higher than a typical summer night. And many of those calls are related to use of personal fireworks. So it is a drain on our city resources, as well as a pretty good danger. And I would say in many places an annoyance. My neighbor fires them off at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 4th of July. And I think there's, we also know that there's folks that come to Mercer Island knowing that it's legal to literally fire them off in the middle of the street. So I think this is worth considering, at least asking the staff to do the work around this.
Okay, Councilmember Reynolds.
Yeah, I'll speak in opposition to the amendment. I also think it's time for this, as Deputy Mayor notes. We're the outlier here. We don't need to be. There are other ways to celebrate Independence Day, and I'm fully in support of those. And I think it's a matter of public safety and public annoyance. Frankly, it's time.
Okay, and Councilmember White.
And I'll just add that my neighborhood folks and folks I've run into love being able to do fireworks and know they're safe and feel like we have safe and sane fireworks. So I have quite a bit of community input personally that this is a beloved opportunity in the summer for our kids to raise money at their lemonade stands to have safe, supervised fireworks in their neighborhoods. So I'm struggling with this one.
Yeah. And I'm not seeing any other hands. I will add that I have pulled my personal soccer pools, lacrosse pools, little league pools, and swimming clubs. I am not finding any parents that support the ban of fireworks, safe and sane stuff. And there was also quite a bit of discussion from people that I talked to about the good community causes that these fund. for the one day that the sales are open. So I'm going to support the motion based on that. Any other discussion? All right, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Jacobson,
Aye.
Mayor Neese,
Aye.
Councilmember Weinberg,
Couldn't hear you.
Nay.
Councilmember Andral,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Nope.
Councilmember Reynolds,
Nay.
Councilmember Weicker.
Aye.
4 to 3.
Thank you. The motion passes. Any other amendments? Councilmember Reynolds.
Yes, I have a couple of questions that may lead to amendments. First, can I get the city manager to provide a little more color on the police body camera one and what it would take to get a cost estimate for that and when we will address that?
Sure. Police worn body cameras is something that the police chief and I both support. It comes with both a significant one-time cost and ongoing staff cost. Councilmember Reynolds, my concern right now is that the initial information that's been provided to me by the staff team is that it will require a half-time to full-time public records employee. I am really concerned about adding additional permanent staff right now. And I would simply like more time to evaluate alternatives, including options for the current workforce to support the public records needs associated with body worn cameras. And I just feel it's prudent to do that work before we present you with an option that requires another full-time staff person without a dedicated funding source. So just to be clear, we support this work, and the police chief was just on screen. He can share a little bit more if you'd like. We feel it offers a line of protection for our folks that work in the field, but it also comes with really significant costs, and we just have not had an opportunity to get to a place that I'm comfortable making a recommendation on this yet. The police chief and I talked about coming to you perhaps the end of this year, more likely early 2024, with an update on our analysis and even the grant funding that's available. There is some funding available from the state, which would set us up for a 2025-26 budget appropriation. So that's my recommendation, and that's what is holding me back from saying we're ready to go on this. I just don't feel we're ready to go right now.
So I forgot exactly what you said on the timing, but if we don't fund this, I think you're saying we're going to come back in the spring with more information. Is that correct, or next spring?
Yeah, what the police chief and I have talked about as his team are working on, let's call it the scoping, the project scoping and the full analysis, including really doing a much deeper dive into the staff resource needs. I'd like to do a check-in with the council ahead of the 2025-2026 biennial budget process. So let's call that Q1 2024. We can even add it to our planning schedule so that we don't lose track of it. To tell you what we found, to present you with some options, and to get us ready to make that budget proposal and to move forward with implementation, timely in 25-26. If that work moves faster than Q1 2024, Councilmember Reynolds, which it could, I'm certainly happy to be back in front of you sooner than that.
Okay, well, I'm not going to raise a stink on that one then with that in mind, but I do support the idea of getting there. We'll wait for it to follow its natural process. Mr. Mayor, I have a couple others I want to talk or ask about or propose amendments on, but I assume you'd rather let somebody else have a turn first.
Let me see if Councilmember Jacobson has a quick comment on the body cam.
I do. I'm in general support of the idea. However, the devil's in the details on this one, from what I understand, particularly because in the absence of properly handling the public records aspect of it, we become a target, and there apparently some people would prey on this for people saying, okay, I want to see all these things and all those things. And there are consequences, financial consequences to violation of the Open Public Records Act that courts are increasingly willing to impose. And while in a perfect world, I think this would be great to be able to snap our fingers and do. I share the city manager's concern to proceed with caution on this, to be sure that we are appropriately positioned by way of public records, by way of training on those things, on body cameras and their use before we jump into the pit. And so I'm very supportive of the city manager and the staff's position on this point in time.
And I'll just add quickly before we move off that, when this does come back to us, we could specifically look at the Washington State Patrol, because Chief Batiste has at least one person making a living off these requests with the Washington State Patrol in particular. I just want to make sure that whatever it is that we look at doing offers us some protection, that we won't end up in a similar boat. Okay. Councilmember Reynolds, do you want to continue on?
Yes, I would move to amend the motion on the floor to add item 2.17, the gun buyback program.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Reynolds, seconded by Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum, and Councilmember Reynolds, to you.
Yeah, I think it's largely self-evident what this one does. I'm just, being the data nerd that I am, I know that guns are now the leading causes of death for children in this country. And I know that gunfire is now passed auto accidents as the cause of death in this country. Fortunately, we've been pretty darn safe on this for Mercer Island. And I will readily admit that the scientific evidence for the efficacy of these programs is mixed. We don't know that it will have an effect, but the one thing we do know for certain is that a gun we buy back is not going to be used to kill somebody on Mercer Island. And I think that's a very low cost option to address this problem. And I'm fully supportive of it.
Okay, Councilmember Jacobson.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Was the amend to add item 2.17?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that's correct.
And who moved the second?
The second was Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Jacobson. You're on mute, Jake.
The staff notes indicate, quote, program will be geared towards Mercer Island residents, close quote. And my question is, what does that mean?
So do we have Chief Holmes with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ed Holmes, your police chief for the record. So this program certainly has some merit, and Councilmember Reynolds and I have had some discussions on this. I guess the only thing timing wise, as we think about discussing this, how our city hall is closed, I'd be reticent to do anything that would bring in substantially more evidence, if you will, or things that would have to go in the evidence room until we get that figured out. We need to probably move the stuff from our evidence room to somewhere else. So I think logistically there's an issue. Conceptually, like I say, the program has some merit worth discussing. Timing wise, I would ask that there's some sensitivity to the timing of such a thing for us.
Okay, so Councilmember Jacobson, did that answer your question about generally, I guess the quote that you were reading from the description?
Chief, could you just comment? We know that these programs have been offered in our region, open to a wide range of residents. When you and I discussed this proposal, we were considering, opening it to Mercer Island residents only, or some limitations. That wasn't a hard and fast decision, but maybe you can share with the council your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it depends on how expansive we want this. It is more manageable if it is confined to those who could show Mercer Island residency if they were to come by to drop off a gun. So otherwise, the merits of the program apply, not just the Mercer Island, but I think logistics, and again, with the current issue aside, logistically, if all things were up and running, is probably a simpler process to handle if it's just people who live on the island. But that's sort of the discussion Jesse and I have had so far.
Got it. Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Yeah, last week I was at the PT Advocacy Committee meeting Friday morning, and they were testing the lockdown, basically the lockdown notice that would come over the PA system. That was pretty scary. I've got a kindergartner and a younger child, and the notion that this is something that could happen at schools is really terrifying. Obviously as a local council, we're pretty limited to what we can do in this area, but I think this is a very small investment that could save lives.
Okay, Councilmember Androl.
Thanks. Well, I'm sensitive to the chief's concerns about timing and location, et cetera. We're not operating out of City Hall. I don't think this is the right time to do this. I think that there's very imperfect evidence that it is effective or the right way for this city to spend money. And I think if this is an initiative that the citizens of the state prioritize, I think this is something maybe local communities could implement, but with state funding. I am all in favor of gun safety and against gun violence, but I don't think this is the answer. And I think we've got more pressing needs for funding at the city right now.
Okay, Councilmember, thank you. Councilmember Reynolds.
I just wanted to note that I think the chief raised a very good point about timing on this, and I don't know if it requires an amendment to my motion, but I'm certainly comfortable with the concept of delaying implementation of this until it can be safely implemented with an appropriate evidence blocker location.
Okay, amending. I don't think that really requires amendment. I think duly noted.
Yes.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all the logistics aside, this is a very simple vote. A vote for this is for safety on the island. A vote against it is against safety.
Councilmember Weicker.
So I kind of disagree with that characterization, Ted. What I want to know, Chief, if you don't mind, do you have any evidence of the efficacy of this kind of program? Like, I know we all want gun safety, but the time and materials and limited to Mercer Island folks on a Saturday in October, like, how effectiveness is this likely to be to actually get guns back? And don't you already take them when people walk them in anyway? I don't think people need a $25 gift card to Target to turn in their guns.
So I'll try to keep this concise. So yes, we currently take guns in from people on the island that they find them, they don't want them, someone passed away in their home and there's a gun they don't want. As far as the efficacy goes, I don't know that there's any hard data on that. Some people say, criminals are not going to be given their guns. So you only get guns from law-abiding citizens. Other people say, well, if you reduce the number of guns in homes, even from law-abiding citizens, you reduce the potential for those guns to be stolen and then used in a crime. We have responded. I remember responding to a burglary in progress, and the guy was trying to get into the gun safe. He was not successful. But had he been successful, he would have left the house with the homeowner's guns. So, there's merit with the program. There's also arguments on both sides of it. So there is no data that I'm aware of that says this prevents crime because, in large part, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to measure prevention. But, there are valid points brought up by everybody here so far on this program.
Very good. Councilmember Reynolds, is that old hand you have?
I'll just make one final comment, then I'll try to be quiet on this issue. There's a stunning number of people impacted by gun violence in this country, not just the 40,000 or so people that die by gunfire every year, but the people that are left behind. I lost my best friend to gunfire in high school, and we don't know that he would have been saved by this program. His family might not have turned in their guns, but he lived in a law-abiding family, and it was killed by his own gun. And I think if we save even one child like that with a program like this, I think it's fully worth it. And we know that every gun brought back is not going to hurt, is not going to kill somebody. there's very little we can do as a locality to address this problem. These are largely state and national issues, but this is one thing we can do. And I feel an obligation to do what's in our power.
Councilmember Anderl.
Yeah, Chief, does the city offer some sort of a gun lock for people who have guns in the home?
Yes, in addition to taking guns in from people who don't want them anymore, we also do offer free gun locks. Project Home Safe, I believe, remember off the top of my head, is the program we partner with. So yes, in our lobby, you can get gun safes at no cost.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Not seeing any further discussion. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Weicker. You're on mute, Councilmember.
Aye.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Aye.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Aye.
Mayor Neese.
Nay.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Aye.
And Councilmember Anderl.
Nay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, motion passes. Any other amendments?
Yes, I do have some. Or maybe this one is just a question for the city manager. Can she comment on, I believe it was 2.12 on the town center liaison? I know we've got staffing levels have gone up and down on that, and it's just not clear to me where we're ending up with the budget proposal as it is on what the staffing level will be.
Sure, and I may invite Jeff Thomas to join me to speak to the comprehensive planning work we're doing on economic development. Council, you may recall in the last biennium, you had funded 1.0 LTE, town center liaison position. That position was held by Sarah Bluvis, and she has moved on to a different position in our city. What we had talked about doing was perhaps a part-time position to really serve just the primary role of liaising with our businesses. The position and the proposal, in my opinion, it lacks a little focus right now in the absence of the economic development planning work that we're doing. And so what Jeff and I have done, and by the way, we don't want to just bring on somebody to, that doesn't have purposeful policy direction and a really buttoned up scope of work. We currently have one of our team members in the planning department serving as the liaison to the Chamber of Commerce. So that work is ongoing. Our customer service team provides support to the business community in whatever ways they need. And then certainly our communications manager is assisting with communications. And Sarah Bluvis also, even though she wears a new hat, we still take her in to continue supporting our communications and engagement on a limited basis with our business community. Jeff, did you want to jump in and add anything to that?
No, that was a good summary, actually.
So just to make sure I caught that, it wasn't clear to me, we're going to have 0 people dedicated to this unless there's an amendment here. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And I believe this is the budget proposal that came from Councilmember Jacobson. Actually, no, this might be the one that came from us. There was another one, and I'm sorry, I don't have my document open in front of me right now. Anyway, we're close. We're on the eve of having your comprehensive planning work done, your economic development work done to give us some focus. And so if the council would like to fund a position like this, I would opine that we need to talk about what the position is going to do and get clarity around work plan goals.
Okay. I guess I will not propose an amendment on this issue. I think you make a compelling argument for waiting until the comp plan work is done.
Okay.
I see some other hands. I'll yield and stop raising issues, but circle back to me, please.
Councilmember Jacobson.
I want to thank the city manager for her observations, which I think are keen. I fully believe that we need to do more for our town center and its businesses. Having said that, it seems to me that hiring a new person starting from scratch is probably going to be very difficult to get much in the way of results. However, I would certainly be in favor of increasing the amount of the stipend or the support or the underwriting or however you want to call it for our Chamber of Commerce. My observation has been that the current head of that Chamber of Commerce has really, put a push on. She's changed the board to have a broader representation of businesses as opposed to property owners, and enlisted a number of the people who are most critical of both the chamber and the city's efforts or lack thereof. And so in the interim, a small amount of money or, an appropriate amount of money, let me put it that way, to the Chamber of Commerce, I think might accomplish what underlies item 2.12 as we are proceeding with other work and seeing if we can get to a better position of focus. And while that's not an amendment here, I would certainly consider that. And if, there's support from my colleagues here and in consultation with the Chamber of Commerce, see what we could, see if we can add something to their charter and support them for it.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Weinberg.
Yeah, sure. So I'm very supportive of either approach of having a new halftime LTE for the town center CPD liaison, or what Councilmember Jacobson was suggesting of providing more support for the Chamber of Commerce. I think in response to the inquiry from Jesse just now about what would this person be doing, in our recent tour that each of us had of the light rail station, there were a couple of things that I think someone like in this position could start working on arranging. We've got a bit of time before the light rail station opens, but I think getting an information kiosk on the platform so that people waiting for the train can learn about local businesses and about what's available in their own town. And also arranging to have a program so that you could have a food vendor booth, a mobile food vendor booth by the west entrance where there is power and there is water. But that would take some arranging with Sound Transit because, well, they own the power and the water. Or at least the facility for it. So it would be something that would take a bit of lead time to set up and arrange. It's only 2 work items, of course, that wouldn't necessarily keep a halftime person busy, but there's some ideas that we could consider for what either that person or a beefed up Chamber of Commerce could do.
Okay, Councilmember Reynolds.
Yes, give me 1 second. I'd like some input on TR 1.6, the leaf blowers one. I was just trying to go back for a climate action plan while we're talking. I haven't finished, but my recollection is that TR 1.6 from the climate, if that's how it was numbered in the climate action plan, was about elimination of leaf blowers on the island, making them illegal everywhere. And the budget proposal that we see here seems to be out about removing them from city operations. And I'm wondering, am I misremembering, or was this a deliberate small step towards the larger one, or what's the thinking on stepping back from the broader goal?
I wouldn't call it stepping back from the broader goal. I'm mindful of the council's direction to work towards elimination of leaf blowers. What we included in this proposal was an opportunity to fund a more meaningful test drive of alternative leaf blowers for city services. We feel if we can do that work and present our findings to you, we'll certainly set the path for the broader policy work in the ban. I am not convinced right now that we have the tools available to us to sufficiently manage the leaf fall, but we're willing to take a step in that direction and procure the equipment and start learning Councilmember Reynolds, I'm really hesitant to dive into a full-blown leaf plan when we have a leaf blower ban, when we haven't, modeled how this might work for ourselves and the volume of landscaping. I do feel that we need to lead. And so we'd like the opportunity to do that with the remaining, portion of the biennium that we have. That sets us up to do that policy work in the following biennium.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Jacobson.
I think that's an old hand.
Okay. If everybody could put their old hands down and resets the order, I'd appreciate it. Councilmember Reynolds, can you put it down and re-raise it?
Sure.
Thanks. That's sequentially what we need to happen. Councilmember Andro.
Thanks. So speaking to the town center liaison person, I think lack of current job definition or scope of work leads me to not be supportive of adding that halftime position. I'd probably like to hear more about bumping up the Chamber of Commerce. I was at one point in favor of cutting funding altogether. I don't really think we have enough information here today for me to be supportive of it, but I don't know that I'm opposed to it either. And then with regard to the leaf blowers, I think baby steps on that. I'm personally not in favor of it at all, but I think that a generalized ban on gas-powered leaf blowers on the island raises a bunch of equity issues for the people who make livings cleaning up yards. I think it raises huge code enforcement issues, because as soon as we do it, we are going to be fielding calls from neighbors saying there's gas-powered equipment being run next door to me, get out here and put a stop to it. And I don't think we have our hands or arms around how we would handle that at all. So even were I in favor of it, and every Tuesday when my neighbors do blow, I am in favor of it, but only on Tuesdays. I still think it creates a lot of problems for the city that I don't think we're in a position to manage right now. So there.
I'm going to take a mayor oral turn here. I had my spring gardening season kickoff where I pulled out my gas hedge trimmer to do the annual trimming of the hedge. Of course, it was broken, as all gas things break over the winter, and it wouldn't start. So I went to the dealer and I bought a new battery-powered combi tool that will make my whole life simple and never have the wintertime destruction of my small combustion engine. And I would tell you that thing didn't last nearly as long as they said. It's $1,000 investment. The battery alone cost $500. It got me through my yard, but it certainly would not be kind to any sort of commercial scale landscaper. And I bought a commercial unit. Right? I, of course, went out and tried this. It's also very heavy. So I would just say that I appreciate the city manager's approach to this. If we can't prove this out on a city-wide scale with our parks and right-of-way teams, I'm not sure that it's worth inflicting on the public, particularly if you don't know exactly the goal that you're trying to achieve. If it's noise reduction, you can just give it up. This thing is not any quieter, is not any more pleasant. I definitely don't want it next to my office window when I'm working. It makes just as much racket as all the rest of this equipment. So I think it's a measured response, but I hope you also know what you're trying to achieve other than the greenhouse gas emissions, which I think I can give you on the electric versus gas, but that's probably the only thing I can give you. All right, Councilmember Reynolds.
I was going to move on to the next issue. I wasn't sure if anybody else was going to speak on the leaf blower issue.
There's lots of interest on the leaf blowers.
Okay.
Jacobson is interested in the leaf blowers. Still can't hear you. Oh, must have been an old hand. Okay. And Deputy Rosenbaum.
Yeah, I was just going to say this is an area where I think we'll learn from Seattle. I mean, they've scheduled. Was an interesting quote, something like, "We'll phase out the use of gasoline-powered leaf blowers by city departments and contractors by 2025, and by businesses and residents by 2027, or later if necessary." So I think we can keep our eye to the west here and learn something about that.
Good advice. Rare.
Okay.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Okay, so I'll reluctantly accept the direction there, so that's fine. I believe the last issue I wanted to talk about, and this is again an issue I'd like some input from the city manager on. We've got an email from Jim Eanes and some social media discussion about the idea of having a town center board to focus on town center development and strategy issues. What is your thinking on the wisdom of that, and would that require a budget amendment at this time if we were to try to implement that?
Councilmember Reynolds, with all due respect, my staff team and I are not prepared to respond to that budget proposal. I would invite and advise the council, if you are interested in standing up a new board or commission, that we consider that either during the mid-biennial budget process this fall or part of a broader budget discussion. This is a major undertaking. Please don't mistake what it takes us to support a board or commission. I did see Mr. Eanes' email. I support his vision and his ideas, but you do not have the staff bandwidth to stand something like that up right now. And I won't go any further because, again, I was not prepared to speak to that as a potential budget proposal item. So I would perhaps invite that to come back this fall or at a future date so that we're prepared to support that discussion. Okay. You also would probably benefit, from completion of the comprehensive plan. And should that type of structure be needed, that would be something that you may wish to identify as an objective or goal in your comprehensive planning process. But you're doing, I can't remember if you're on the economic development work group or not. No. Part of my theme here is Jeff Thomas and I and my other senior staff team members, we absolutely support the business community, but we would certainly benefit from us, getting that work done ahead of us and that policy direction so that we have clear objectives in terms of what we're trying to deliver. But that's my candid reaction.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. I'll resist another amendment. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Jacobson.
Yes, I last year had asked, I think that something be put in either in this proceeding or some other one about getting some outside help with planning what we're going to do with our town center. And in preparation for this meeting, I spoke with both city manager and our planning manager, Mr. Thomas, about this and withdrew it because it's my belief that we need to get some outside help to decide not only where we want to go, but where we can go with the city. And so I guess I'm a top-down kind of guy on this entire subject. I don't guess, I am. And I would, in conjunction with that, or as a result of that, I think that the views of the current business community would be taken into effect. And whether their views are good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know at this point because they're, I don't know if they're necessarily expressed, but I still strongly feel that trying to do this from the bottom up is a real problem. And what's supported my opinion here is discussing this whole situation with some planning managers and some business people in other communities, specifically Edmonds. And that is put up as a poster child for a robust town center and milking every car waiting for the ferry to benefit, to patronize their downtown. In any event, I believe, and I'm hopeful of giving the city manager some more beneficial thinking or clear thinking on the subject. And so my feeling is that not only should we explore an interim solution or an interim assistance to the Chamber of Commerce to downtown, but also look around and say, bite the bullet and hire a consultant who's done some of this stuff, who can tell us, you know, here are the chances of where you could go with this. So that's that explains in part why my last fall bitch on this subject ain't here. And number two is where I think we need to go to make this a robust downtown.
Mr. Mayor, may I take a quick turn and just invite Jeff Thomas onto the screen? I do have a follow-up question, and as he's coming on. Council, remember in your the economic development element of your comprehensive plan that we are working on right now, it's so important that we set clear vision and policies and even identify action items that will guide this work and will help us identify the tools and resources we need to implement. That's both staff, it's potentially consultants, or even a tool like a board or commission or some type of advisory body. So Jeff, I called you on. Can you remind us when the council is anticipated to touch the economic development work? I'm hearing a lot of excitement and enthusiasm for getting to that work, and I just can't recall the timeline off the top of my head.
Yeah, sure. The Economic Development Work Group is in the process of wrapping up their effort, and then we will be taking that draft economic development element that they've worked on to the Planning Commission for a first look here in 2023. I would anticipate the schedule, at least as it's laid out currently, we would be moving that forward to the council during the legislative review. So it would not be until 2024.
It will start, I think I want to call out, it will be in front of the Planning Commission though, just to clarify, by this year.
Yeah, the commission is doing a preview review, if that makes sense, of each element. So they've actually worked through a number of the elements of the comp plan already, and but the economic development one is still pending, given the work of the group that's been going on.
That's great. Thank you. As we're all interacting with members of our business community, I think it's really important for them to engage in this process and provide their feedback. And Councilmember Reynolds, you mentioned a community member that had some ideas about, potential advisory board. Again, I would invite him to engage in the process as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Yeah, just to add to that real quick, I sit on the economic development subcommittee with Ted and Lisa, and we're meeting, I think it's Thursday afternoon, to go through it. And the last time we met was to basically go over the sequencing of what's currently being proposed in the chapter. And Jake, to your point, I think that this level of analysis isn't there, and I think we just need to be really thoughtful about doing it the right way, so that we're actually studying what we want to do, in the right way. So I agree with you in principle. I do think, getting some, assistance here and taking a close look at it is the right way to do it. I just want to make sure we're kind of working in the right process.
Perfect. All right. Council, thanks for that process and discussion. We are at that moment where I call the vote. I'm not seeing any more amendments. So City Clerk, please call the roll on the amended motion.
Can you recap what that was? Sorry.
Yeah, maybe we could put it on the screen and be the best way to get everybody to see the full impacts of what we just proposed.
I don't have it with the amendments added. Give me just 1 second and I can add those. My keyboard will work.
Do you need more than that, Councilmember Weicker, while we're waiting?
No, I just want to confirm that we are not including all those other amendments we talked about at the moment, right?
This is what you got on the screen, I think, is what is going to be included.
Yep. Can you scroll down? And there we go. Yep, that's correct.
Can everybody read that? Everybody got it? Okay, that's what we're going to call the roll call on. Proving that. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Jacobson.
Aye.
Councilmember Andral.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum.
Aye.
Mayor Neese.
Aye.
Councilmember Reynolds,
Aye.
Councilmember Weicker,
Aye.
and Councilmember Weinberg.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Motion passes. Nice work, everyone, getting through that. It's been a many months process of starting a funding list and getting dispensing with the funding list. So our next item of regular business is AB 6254 2022 Community Member of the Year, for which we will welcome Chief of Administration Ali Speets and City Clerk Andrew Larson.
I might not be.
Everybody get your email ready for some voting. Oh, Ali, I'm not sure we're picking your audio up.
We could hear you and then we couldn't hear you, Ali.
I think they're in the same room, so somebody's got to mute their mic. There we go. Almost out.
Okay.
Perfect.
Hi. Can you all hear me now?
Sure can.
Yes. I can't hear you though. So this is just, there's no technical difficulties, is there? There we go. Okay, just a second. Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
And I can hear you. Yay. I probably should have just let Andrea take this one. So as you know, for the last 33 years, we have been honoring members of our community for their good deeds and commitments to making Mercer Island a great place to work and play and live. And so you have the opportunity tonight or today to nominate community members that you would like to see recognized. As a note, we are recognizing the 2022 Community Member of the Year, which we will then bring in front of the council at a future meeting. Andrea, is there anything else you want to include?
Nope, that was about it. We're going to do the voting. We'll have you guys make nominations for who you would like to nominate for the Community Member of the Year. And then since we're all on Zoom, we're going to do the voting for the Community Member of the Year via email.
Okay, open the floor for nominations. There are some nominations that have been sent by email. Do you have all those kind of currently?
I do. I have the 3 nominations which council received via email. The ones received from the community via email were for Gordon Polson, Gwen Loosemore, and Lola Dean.
Okay, so council, I've taken the liberty of adding all the community nominations as nominations. You're welcome to add to that if you want. Does anybody have any additional nominations they'd like to make? Councilmember Anderall.
Yeah, I believe Michael Medved was nominated last year, and I thought his nomination had merit. I'd like to put him up again for his tireless service to the community.
Okay, very well.
And beautification of our beautiful island.
Councilmember Anderall, I didn't catch the last name.
Medved, M-E-D-V-E-D.
Once again, could you read the list of current nominations?
Yes, current nominations are Gordon Polson, Gwen Loosemore, Lola Dean, and Michael Medved.
Very good. Any other nominations? Not seeing any, then I guess we can move to voting.
Okay, on the first round of voting, council, you'll select 2 people who you would like to nominate to be Community Member of the Year. You cannot vote for the same person twice. You'll vote by replying to me. And the email has been sent. Okay, thank you, council. We'll have 2 nominees moving to the second round.
Lisa, is that old hand or new hand?
For the second round of voting, you will vote for 1 person. And the email has been sent.
Perfect, thank you.
It is unanimous. Council has selected Lola Dean as Community Member of the Year for 2022.
Very good. As 2022 Community Member of the Year, staff will invite them to a future council meeting to be recognized. Thank you, council, for the nominations and the voting. Thank you, Councilmember Weicker, for making that nomination. All right, the next hybrid meeting of the City Council is scheduled for Tuesday, June 6, 2023 at 5 p.m. The time is now 4:13 p.m. As a reminder to the City Council, please stay seated until city staff has terminated the broadcast. Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us today.